Good afternoon to you all. I believe we are now live on YouTube. A very warm welcome to the Provincial Parliament's Ad Hoc Committee on COVID-19. My name is Mireille Wenger and I'm the chairperson of this ad hoc committee. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all the members that are attending, as well as the organisations that are with us this afternoon. We'd also like to welcome members of the public and the media joining us on YouTube Live. We have received an apology from Honourable Syed, as well as Honourable Heron, who will only be joining us for part of the meeting, as well as Honourable van der Westhuizen, who will join us a little late. We also have received an apology from SAFTU and COSATU for today's meeting. Would members like to introduce themselves, please?
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Derek America and I'm a member of the committee.
Good afternoon, Chair. Goeiemiddag almal. Dalen Mitchell.
Good afternoon, Chairperson and all members. Good afternoon, Chairperson and all members. Wendy Philander, member of this committee.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Deirdre Bartman, member of the committee.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Ferland Christians, a member of this committee.
Goeiemiddag, voorzitter. So, member of the committee.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Good afternoon, members. Regan Allen.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. Andrikus van der Westhuizen.
Good afternoon, Chair, colleagues. Cameron Dugmore, ANC. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Chair Brett Heron.
Good afternoon, Chair Ricardo Mackenzie.
Okay, so we have a full house in terms of members.
Cape Chamber.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sean Atcham from Mitchell's Plain Chamber of Commerce, Plain Chamber.
Okay. So we have a full house in our committee this afternoon. A very warm welcome to you all. And before we commence with the meeting itself, I'm just going to go through our rules of engagement as they were for virtual meetings. We have muted everyone at the start of the meeting, and that's to avoid background noises. If members could flag any points of order by using the raise hand function or by using the chat function. We ask generally that video and audio is switched off, which helps us improve the quality of the call. However, if a person is presenting or asking a question or speaking, we would encourage them to put on their video and of course their microphone. And we ask that once that person has concluded speaking, if they would turn off the mic and video. We also ask that if there are any presentations, that the person responsible share those presentations, and once the presentation is over, if they would unshare and turn off the camera. That just helps us keep rules of order then. So today we have a very important meeting. We are looking at economic recovery and livelihoods as one of the themes of this ad hoc committee on COVID-19. And this is, of course, a very integral part of the second pandemic. I'm just going to mute all. All right. And so lives and economic recovery and livelihoods is an important part of what we're calling the second pandemic, which is jobs losses and dignity. And we have invited the major union mother bodies, as well as the chambers of commerce in some of the most affected industries, as we would like to hear from each of you, what are the major challenges? We will hear from the unions and chambers first, and we will have a Q&A after that. We have asked the organizations here today to present and to engage with us on how the pandemic has affected their respective industries in both a health perspective as well as a work and livelihoods perspective. We've asked what work their organizations are doing to support their industries and their members. We're also interested to know if the pandemic has brought about any particular innovations. and any concerns that the organizations would like to raise with this committee relating to COVID-19 and the response to this pandemic. So a very warm welcome to you all, and thank you very much again for joining us today and for engaging with the Provincial Parliament. We're going to start with a briefing from the Federations of Unions of South Africa, FEDUSA. I believe we have Rifta Ajam on the line, who's the General Secretary of FEDUSA. Do we have you on the line? Or if I could...
Speaker, I am indeed with my delegation. Thank you so much.
Very warm welcome to you. Could I ask if you could introduce your team before you get started?
Yes, thank you very much. Just for purposes of process, do we switch on our videos, or do we keep it off just for purposes of continuing to have stability on the platform?
If you are speaking or presenting, if you could use your camera, that would be ideal. And then once you're finished, if you could turn it off.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll then just try and turn on my audio at this stage.
There we go. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, first and foremostly, and good afternoon to the honourable members of the committee and the House this afternoon. I have to make an absolute and outright declaration that it is still Women's Month, so the FEDUSA delegation this time round, as we champion many aspects in a socioeconomic framework, is an all-female delegation this afternoon. So it would be myself, Rifta Ajam, and I will be accompanied by the Provincial Secretary of HOSPERSA, Ms. Martinique Marinas. Equally so, the Labour Relations Officer from the PSA, Ms. Natalie Adams, and then equally so from our personal care sector of UASA, I've got Ms. Yumna Abrams that will equally be joining our delegation. So that would be from our side, Honourable Chair.
Thank you very much. A warm welcome to you all. And so with those introductions done, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. I have submitted the presentation to the procedural officer. I would just like to request that she flight the presentation. Otherwise, if she would allow me control, then I can equally show that on the screen right now.
Ms. Adams, are you able to share the presentation?
If Ms. Ajam wants us to, we can. Otherwise, she can share.
Okay, perfect. I will then take control from here onwards. I trust that the shared screen functionality is accessible, so I will take it from here. Once again, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you once again for the opportunity on behalf of the delegation. To the honourable members, the brief that has been given to us this afternoon is to share with you the challenges that has been encountered by FEDUSA and all its affiliates during the hard lockdown, and equally so as we move forward, unpacking the specific sectors that have endured the majority of the hardships, including the health perspective. But as we move forward, we've equally got a few recommendations that we would like to share with the House. And we would equally want to incur at this point in time that the content that we will be presenting is in no way a means to completely convince you of it, nor do we wish for you to reject it outrightly, but to reflect on the current state of affairs in the province, and equally so as part of the overall whole in terms of the national perspective and the oversight role that this committee will be playing in terms of the recovery strategy and the economic response as we move forward. So colleagues, my apologies, honourable members of the House, as we start with this presentation, I would like to request your indulgence first and foremostly to pay honour and tribute to our fallen heroes in the struggle. To many of you, they will be familiar, they are familiar faces in terms of the health infrastructure and the role that they have played in the province in particular. We have bid farewell to them in terms of the struggle that they have endured during the time of the lockdown, and they have lost their lives to COVID-19. So they are the silent heroes that, we once again honor, and they will surely not be forgotten in our books of history as stalwarts in the struggle, specifically so in the Western Cape, the full outreach in terms of the geographic spread. So colleagues and honourable members of the House, when we take a look at the pandemic and the affected industries that have been exposed to and have been affected directly in terms of their livelihoods, but more so in terms of the health perspective, we want to emphasize that as much as the state president has called on this pandemic, and equally so emphasize that it's extraordinary measures that we have to engage in. We spoke about the social compact that needs to be fostered as a direct result of the hard lockdown. In terms of the FEDUSA response to the matter, we have seen the pandemic causing total mental stress. It has elicited fears of anxiety, depression, and physical exhaustion that has been experienced by the members. We will be articulating this presentation from both a public sector perspective as well as a private sector perspective in terms of the extensive array of our membership that it does cover. When we take a look at the pandemic more so, we take a look at the frontline members that have been engaging directly in this pandemic, serving meticulously to ensure that they are able to uphold their duties. And as it is outlined there, the nurses have taken an oath to serve and not an oath to die. So in this perspective, they have been conflicted in their duties towards serving those that are in need, and equally so trying to allay the fears of their family members by the pressures that has been brought about by the pandemic. Equally so during the time of the lockdown, the stigma that has been associated with the pandemic has equally put our frontline personnel, especially those in essential services, in a challenging position and making those ultimate sacrifices in terms of how they move forward. Whilst they have faced the hardships in terms of the sacrifices they have made, equally so in terms of the private sector membership, we have equally faced the remote working conditions, the added pressures that this new dispensation has brought about, and equally so trying to manage a new normal amidst what the pandemic has brought about. More so, we've seen that during the hard lockdown, where people had observed the protocols and taken heed of the health response first and foremostly, from FEDUSA's side, representing in excess of 500,000 members, we have been faced with a coalface. It has essentially been extremely challenging, and we have seen those Section 189 retrenchments and ultimately the closures coming through. Our concern predominantly remained the small, medium and micro enterprises that continues to be the heartbeat of this economy, how they were able to find expression once again in the economy when their knees were just totally chopped off. We've seen just before the onset of the pandemic that the unemployment rate stood at 29.1%, and with the hard lockdown, we have seen the total move now with the quarterly labour force stats out for the unemployment rate rising to around about 30.1%. The National Treasury, including the Department of Employment and Labour, has forecast job losses at various quantums, but currently the National Treasury forecast has seen the job losses amounting to an estimate of approximately 7 million. I have highlighted the various sectors where FEDUSA is engaged in, where the majority of the impacts have been felt. The automotive sector, the printing and packaging sector, in particularly hard knocked with the advent of the fourth industrial revolution and the automotive processes that have been linked to that, and more so with the spotlight being faced on the personal care industry, retail and manufacturing as well, and more so aviation, transport, as well as hospitality. The following slide slides basically gives us an indication of what the statistics have been coming from the CCMA in particular, with the initial quantum pegged at 1,800 retrenchment cases that were already referred during the hard lockdown. Once again, the focus on the small scale companies and the Section 189 processes. And there, once again, we have seen that 100,000 workers were affected, but that was only the interim statistics that were presented. We still have to find an indication of what the greater statistics are going to be. But once again, private transport, looking at approximately just under 15,000 retrenchments that were in place, the retail sector being hit hardest by the process with 23,000 jobs, and once again, the hospitality and the tourism sector that has taken a massive knock, only now being able to operate under level 2 when the restrictions were eased, and we are now at level 2. So essentially our plea to the Western Cape government, with the province being ideally located as a geographic destination and one that enjoys very good global rapport, we would appeal to the Western Cape government to try and take a look at those sectors in particular, especially now that September is around the corner with a peak season, looking at various factors. We have also included, as part of the next 2 slides, some graphics that speaks to the financial resources of businesses and them being able to continue throughout the hard lockdown. And we have seen that 36% of businesses have indicated that they are not confident that their business has the financial resources, and at the same time, the business survival without any turnover, the figures look equally grim. So once again, the confidence levels and the assurance in terms of the climate, the economic climate that needs to be put in place so that businesses can continue to do what is required, and equally so from a labour perspective to advance the issues. I'm sure that you have noted that there have been many interventions from FEDUSA in particular in order to support our industries and our members that have been engaged in this process. We are well represented at NEDLAC. We are serving on the Rapid Response Task Team in order to support the job retention and creation strategies, including so the DTI master plans and the collaborative initiatives that have been brought about at the Western Cape level in particular, by way of the many government departments, but more so with the Department of Employment and Labour, to make sure that those various challenges that Labour has experienced during the time of the lockdown, especially so with essential services, could take place. And in this way, we had attempted to bring about corrective action to ensure that there could be this mutual understanding by way of the social compact that has been necessitated in order to support both our interest as Labour and equally so that of the employers. And as highlighted at the bottom, we've had many engagements with the Department of Health, the DG's office in particular, to rectify some of the shortcomings. We have had many innovations that we have been driving from our side, in particular with the glaring deficiencies that had been noted. As I've mentioned, this is about engaging, trying to co-create strategies, and in no way a complete and outright criticism in terms of what has been happening. But unfortunately, we cannot ignore the realities that have been experienced on the ground floor, from a provincial perspective. From our side as FEDUSA, we have collectively attempted to ensure that there were continued and sustained drives, especially in terms of PPEs, where we have found that within the health infrastructure, in particular in the province, we have found the departments wanting on many factors. And in that way, what we had done was on the 1st of May, which is significant to workers, we had launched our own Isibononelo Fund, and we had also been very supportive of the Solidarity Fund on our national engagements to ensure that there was a continued lifeline to support our unions in particular and our members in terms terms of the critical PPE that was required, especially for those members engaged in essential services and those that could operate under the initial lockdown levels of 5 and 4. We have, by way of this interventions, ensured that those newfound compacts were put in place because ultimately we needed to ensure that we could safeguard our members, but equally so provide a new dynamic in terms of the relations, in terms of government, labor, as well as business. In this regard, we've had many engagements at a ministerial level, and we are really hoping that the same kind of courtesy can be extended by way of the Western Cape government, where we can make sure that those co-creative strategies can be articulated. The key concerns that we wish to raise at the stage, we've only highlighted some of the major challenges, but it is not necessarily limited to this process. Once again, during this Women's Month presentation, we have found that our women and our children have taken substantial knocks. They have still been and continue to be subjected to practices of gender-based violence. They are still in abusive homes, and we are therefore appealing to the government to assist in the FEDUSA plight as part of labour and as part of the overall tripartite structure, and by that I mean government, business and labour, to move towards the ratification of Convention 190 in terms of the elimination of all forms of gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work. The crime stats in this province continues to be an issue that is plaguing us in terms of moving forward. The minister had released the latest stats, and we just feel that, we are not necessarily making the necessary positive strides in order to move the matter forward. One of the glaring challenges that we have identified is the disparities in the workplaces in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. We are of the opinion that had the necessary measures been in place, been operative and being completely functional, the landscape in order for us to respond to the functionalities would not have been as overwhelming as what it was. So we would really want the Department of Health, with the oversight of this committee, to be able to play that active monitoring and oversight function to take matters forward. We believe that there's ineffective government systems control and management, likewise in terms of the payments of grants to beneficiaries. We will highlight some challenges that we have identified throughout this period. One of the greatest stumbling blocks that we have encountered was the Unemployment Insurance Fund. We do understand that it is a national concern, but once again, it is an issue that has affected our members in the province likewise, and we want that collaboration at all levels of government to see this process through. The hardships cannot be overemphasized, but most importantly, what we have identified and where the provincial perspective can be articulated is the employer violations that have been exposed. And yeah, I have to say that there were gross violations in terms of the deductions that had been made, but unfortunately those that have not been paid, deductions made by people not being registered on the system. Unfortunately, the consequence management is once again non-existent. The system's deficiencies, and as of early this morning, we have found that payments have once again been suspended. These obviously had contributed to the hardships that had been experienced, as the UIF was supposed to have served the purpose of that soft landing that we required in terms of the single largest intervention in the country.
Sorry, just to let you know that you've got 3 minutes left, please.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm going to be very quick now. The transgressions have just been extremely enormous. My colleagues will expand on those ones, but we've seen our health infrastructure being absolutely terrible in terms of the response that has been in place. The personal care sector in particular, where the transgressions were fast and furious as they came in under the lockdown protocols. We just believe that the jurisdictional conflicts is something that needs to be sorted out. My colleagues will speak to those issues at the same time. One of the absolute heartbreaking scenarios here, with the province leading this process in calling for the testing criteria to be changed, has been the shifting of the burden, the lack of capacity, and equally so the quality of the outcomes with testing that has been delayed due to the huge backlogs. And at the same time, we are just disheartened with the fact that there were departmental budgets in place, but unfortunately, the province was once again on a back foot when it came to those measures. When it came to alcohol and tobacco, there's various aspects that we can outline. Equally so with a statement made this morning by the Health Minister, Dr. Mkhize. The psychological impacts is something that our colleagues will speak to extensively, especially in terms of the health response and equally so in the private sector. Infrastructure is not something that is new to everybody, and colleagues will once again outline what they require from government in terms of the zoning systems within the world of work, especially for SMMEs. I'm going to go to the recommendations very quickly. We do believe that awareness campaigns should form the bedrock of the post-response, and equally now in terms of where we are, noting that the World Health Organization has indicated that we should prepare ourselves to live with the pandemic for another year and a half per se. So the importance of government in this process is quite important. Equally so, the government's response in terms of the social dilemma must be unpacked, especially with a wellness strategy that must be in place, and how to resume services beyond normality. Healthcare remains a massive bone of contention. We've got some key recommendations in terms of the critical posts that must be filled, and we do believe in terms of the Premier's Twitter feeds in terms of the closure of the Hospital of Hope, that all those beds and all that infrastructure that was created during this time should be rerouted to our public health institutions at this stage. Transport, there has been a few positive strides, but the Western Cape government once again needs to take the matter forward. Localization is an absolutely imperative aspect of the whole process. And then once again, we are calling for a social compact with government in terms of its oversight role, but moving matters forward, as we are calling for an economic recovery strategy for this province. In particular, we are calling for an all-inclusive strategy, including all partners, and in particular now that the season has been opened, the domestic tourism drive must be finalized, and launching this proposed forum should be formalized in terms of what we deem as the immediate wins, a short as well as a long-term strategy, and then also identifying sectoral interventions with clear timeframes in order to take the whole process forward. Chairperson and members, I thank you very much. That would be the presentation from our side, and any key questions my colleagues would equally be on hand to be able to engage any questions that you may have in terms of the presentation. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jam. Thank you very much for having prepared that presentation and the very thorough presentation that you put together for us. We're going to have the Q&A right at the end, so we will park the questions until then. We then move on to the Chambers of Commerce. We're going to start with the Cape Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We have the Executive Director, Sid Beamer, here, who does have some time constraints, and so therefore I'll ask him to start first. Good afternoon, Mr. Beamer.
Hi there, Chair. Thank you so much for the invitation. We were briefed that we had 7 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, so I will be somewhat shorter. Okay. So I'll answer the questions as you posed them. You can hear me okay and see me okay?
Yes, we can. If I could just ask if the presentation could, if you could stop sharing the presentation. I'm not sure who's sharing it at the moment, whether it was our procedural officer or if it was Ms. Ajam sharing it. There we go. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, your first question was how the pandemic has affected industry and members from a health perspective. Mental health has always been a problem, but for some reason or for it's just been a neglected issue. We've never dealt with it very well. Depression and anxiety are now off the scale. The average age for depression also has dropped dramatically. So mental health on its own is an issue, but if we had to look at COVID, the effect of mental health by COVID has been due to the isolation, where social isolation is not healthy for anybody, and also, one of the things that it does when you are socially isolated is it encourages people to do the most unhealthy thing that they can for their mental health, and that is to ruminate. So we have seen our staff, we have had reports of people who are struggling, and we can try, and we do try as much as we can to support those staff. But people need to speak up, and for a lot of people, it still has that aura of weakness, and it's not seen as an illness, unfortunately. And what we've done as a chamber is we've instituted with our staff the 3 times rule, where you have to connect with your team preferably 3 times a week. And we also make it compulsory to put on the video, and that's quite strange. The outcome of that has been that relationships have remained very strong between the staff. And I am in other corporate meetings where the video is off, and it's stilted, it's cold, you have to wait for the person to speak to get their response. So you need to leverage everything that technology provides. And if you do that, you certainly are going to see the results. And look, we've had occupational health and safety with us for a long time, but I don't think we've ever focused on the health aspect. It all seems to focus on the safety, and I think this is a wake-up call for us to look at health. And we should start teaching people early healthy thinking skills, and it should be something that we address at school already. So mental health, yes, it's well, let's call a spade a spade. It's predominantly depression and anxiety, and it's something that we need to deal with, and it needs to come out of the shadows. As far as a work and livelihoods perspective goes, obviously it's accelerated the migration to digital. We're all online now. We've learned to, let me see if I can, gosh, sorry, let me. Okay. Okay. Let me just switch that off. It's enabled us to really leverage technology. We were lucky as a Chamber of Commerce. Within 24 hours, we had everybody working remotely. Most of us were already on laptops. And the new transport to work for us has become data. And it's a bit unfortunate in South Africa that data is still so expensive. Yeah, livelihoods have obviously been affected, but there's a difference between a problem and a storm. We see COVID as a storm. It can be devastating. It can leave death and destruction in its wake, as we've seen. But it's a storm, and it passes. And it will have passed completely by the time the vaccine comes out, which looks like the first quarter of next year. But our problems won't go away. The problems are still crime, unemployment, the economy, the state-owned enterprises, corruption, and the social infrastructure that's been affected. Our strategy has remained the same. Our strategy is engagement. The more engaged we are with our members and potential members, the healthier the chamber is. And we've kind of added 2 new values onto our value set. And those are reasonableness and innovation. And we find that that has worked really well for us. Then your third question is, what are we doing to support industries and members? To be quite honest, it's been able to get our value proposition out there, and for us, it's been business as usual. We focus on engagement. We usually have about 200 events a year, and if I extrapolate that to 12 months from March, we're probably looking at closer to 300. And we serve our members with unique demands as well. And when lockdown came, how do I get my factory staff home at night? My container of olives is stuck in the harbor. So it's also created some unique problems that we've dealt with. And then when the energy crisis hit, we had the energy summit. When the water crisis hit, we had the water summit. And we also had the lockdown summit. I think that was from level 4. And we'll have another lockdown summit now about level 2, where we'll invite selected sectors and then we'll share their learnings. Innovation in the sectors. Well, you know, the Western Cape is very dependent on tourism and agriculture. I think in tourism, we've obviously been forced to leverage our investments, which are usually brick and mortar. There's some interesting applications, hotels, doing storage, office space, getting, as they say, sweating their assets. In other words, saying to themselves, what can we do under the circumstances? And there's certain industries that were able to digitize. And an example would be the fitness industry. I've got a neighbor here who wakes me up at 5 o'clock every morning, shouting into his cell phone, teaching his class how to exercise. So a lot of, if you can migrate digitally, if you can't migrate digitally, it is a problem. And if you can find options and innovations, and we are seeing a lot of innovation out there. Then any concerns that we have as a chamber? Well, the support packages were from the feedback we've received were not efficiently handled. Also, we're not aggressively asking for the lifting of lockdown, but what we can't condone is some of the irrational legislation involving lockdown, such as those involving you can't transport alcohol to the harbor, you can't have open sandals, cigarettes. We still don't understand what prompted that decision. But that is one area that we're shooting ourselves in the foot. South Africa is not that competitive, and if we're going to keep making decisions like that, we're going to not remain an uncompetitive nation. At the end of the day, I think COVID has given us a unique experience. It's forced the 4th industrial revolution on us a lot quicker than we would have migrated to generally. But I think it's an opportunity for us to be brought closer together as a society. We've never been as technologically connected, but we've never been as socially disconnected. And hopefully we can close that gap. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pima, who is the Executive Director of the Cape Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I believe you have some time constraints and will be leaving our meeting at 2 o'clock. So if there are any questions, if in order, we'll forward those by email, if that's all right.
Yes, that's absolutely fine.
Super. Thank you very much for joining us today and for those insights. Next, we have Sizwe Ngame, who's the President of the Black Business Chamber, who will be talking to the committee. Do we have you on the line, sir? Do we have a representative from the Black Business Chamber on the line? think you might be on mute.
Hello, Chair.
Ah, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Yes.
Mr. Cliche, the Secretary General of the Black Business Chamber, please be welcome.
Yes.
Will you be doing the inputs on behalf of the Business Chamber? Oh, you're on mute again, sorry. Still on mute?
Unmuted on my side.
Yes, now we've got you. We can hear you loud and clear now. Thank you.
Good day, Honorable Chairperson, as well as the rest of the honorable members. My name is Ndwekaya Cishe. I am going to make this very brief presentation on behalf of Black Business Chamber. I'm having Mr. Sizwe Ngame, the current president of Black Business Chamber. He is also part and parcel of the meeting. I'm also having Mrs. Renee Andrews, who is the Treasurer General. Our presentation is going to be very brief. We are going to give a bit of a background in terms of the Black Business Chamber. Then we will go into our business development strategy. That is where we'll explain the interventions that we are doing in terms of helping grassroots and Black Business Chambers, Black Business Chamber members as well as other members generally. Then we will go into the specifics in terms of the impact that the COVID has done on the members general. The importance for us actually to start giving this background is we have experienced that most of the people, they usually confuse Black Business Chamber with the Black Business Council. So hence, for us, it becomes very important that we start giving that background. We started Black Business Chamber in 2011, and by that time, we were going by the name of Western Cape Black Business Chamber. But we came to realize as we were rolling out one of our programs that there was an interest actually also coming from outside of the province. We had some sporadic members in KZN, Eastern Cape as well as Gauteng. That was when we realized that a Black Business Chamber is having a potential of growing from becoming just a provincial chamber into becoming a national chamber. So yeah, that was when we started rebranding now into becoming a Black Business Chamber. So basically, I'm trying to go through my presentation here.
Would you like us to flight the presentation for you?
Yes, you can do that, please. Okay.
Okay, we've got the presentation on the screen.
Okay. Basically, our mission, in fact, being Black Business Chamber, being to mobilize, on daily basis, making sure that we inform and guide business community, corporate as well as government, because we believe that as Black Business Chamber, being the people who are playing, in that space already, it is our responsibility to make it a point that, we give, that guidance in terms of how our members, can best be helped, in terms of pursuing their businesses. So we do have our vision as well, being to see an active, innovative, sustainable Black SMME sector. So our membership being individuals who are joining sectors and sectors, joining BBC. Our sectors are having construction and built environment, we're having retail and services, IT, manufacturing, small-scale farming and agriculture, fishing and aquaculture, tourism, hospitality, entertainment, education, and skills training. Then we're having informal traders as well as one of our sectors. Going straight into our business development strategy, actually these are the interventions that we are doing in terms of helping our members as well as business generally. But some of the interventions we've been doing even during the lockdown. One of those interventions is basically the events that we would host from time to time to give that interactive platform so that our members can have the opportunity to interact with the decision makers, people from government and all that. So the information sharing sessions, we do have that. We also host some business breakfasts and dinner sessions. We do have business advice and support, where we would advise them in terms of more special during this time of the COVID, shopping online and also marketing their businesses online. So those are some of the issues that we do under our business advice and support. Then linkages, we do a lot of referrals. We play a facilitation role, which is basically our, our expertise as the chamber. Most of what we're doing is basically the facilitation role. We do host even some trade missions, when the environment is conducive to do that. Partnerships, JVs and consortiums, we do help our members in terms of doing that. But once again, coming back to the facilitation part of it, during this COVID period, we came to realize as BBC that our members and the grassroots businesses generally, being in fact the people that we are targeting as BBC, because our membership is coming from grassroots businesses. We came to realize that now that government, either be it national, provincial or otherwise, now that they are running, in fact, they are rolling out some interventions in terms of trying to help, the relief measures, whatever, I mean, you call it. We came to realize that our members do not get an opportunity to be informed, firstly, in terms of these interventions, due to several reasons, more especially during the hard lockdown. Firstly, most businesses were closed, including the internet cafes, and majority of small and emerging businesses, you find out that they do not have a privilege of, internet, connectivity efficiently at homes. Let's say, for instance, now that there were some application forms, that businesses had to fill in, scan and send so that they can participate into those relief measures that were out there, we came to realize that no, man, the majority of our members, you know, they do not participate, you know, in terms of this, because the internet shops at that point in time, they were closed and all that. So we started actually lobbying both provincial government. We wrote to the Common Council in the provincial government as well as national government that time to make it a point that they were prioritizing, you know, the internet cafes, making them one of the essential services providers, because we came to realize that our people, because they do not have you know, the privilege of having some laptops and printers at home where they can fill in and scan, you know, those documents. Those are some of the things that we started lobbying provincial government and, you know, and national government. But besides that, we went as far as engaging both CIFA and CEDA to say that, look, you being the agents of the Department of Small Business Development, we realize that most of our members do not, you know, get this information where they have to participate. You know, for instance, you know, there are programs that they are currently running, the spaza shop support schemes, small bakeries and confectionaries, automotive, and, you know, and all that. So, but we came to realize that the majority of our members do not know that there are such schemes, you know, available, you know, to help them. So we started engaging these agencies to say that, no, now that we cannot go physically down to, you know, to our constituencies, to the people, so that we share this information, let us even use now some of the media platforms that are available within our space. We started facilitating some commercial radio stations, and that program is still, you know, ongoing. Now, as we speak, Mr. Ngame would go with the provincial manager of CEDA, where, you know, we would encourage our members, inform them about these support schemes, and encourage them, you know, so that, you know, they follow up on that. So those are some of the interventions that we did. So now, as I'm about to close now, you know, I will just go straight to, you know, to the impact. You know, it's basically some points, you know, that we feel that are important. Most of our members, they've basically suffered, you know, in terms of revenue, you know, generation. Remember that most of them, they are operating in townships, and as such, most of the people in townships, you know, they suffered actually, you know, in terms of income generation. So that also impacted on the other hand on our members. There are some of those whose businesses, you know, have basically, you know, closed. For instance, I'm having even an example of a lady who just opened up, you know, a salon in Yesterday, that was before the the lockdown. But before her business could even start, you know, picking up, you know, there came now a lockdown. After that, lady has invested all her resources into that shop, but now she is complaining that she's struggling now actually, you know, because before the business could operate, if you know effectively, there was a lockdown, and now people now generally do not have sufficient income. So those are some of the things. One of the things that we think we must see is actually the issue of the skewed procurement policies that we believe are disfavoring the emerging entrepreneurs. And this is something that has always been happening even before the COVID. And we cannot talk more about this because hardly where you will find the small businesses having participated now even in these PPE whatever tenders, these PPP tenders that that were coming out, you find out that almost none of the small businesses actually participated into that. And that is also due to the fact that the policies that are there, you know, they are actually sidelining them, you know. So then lastly, you know, the question of the non-existent food distribution centers that are managed by SMMEs. You know, we know that there is a lot of, you know, food parcels that are going, you know, out there, distribution centers, but, you know, the question is who from the small businesses are basically participating, you know, into that. And all of us, actually, we know, you know, the answer to that. So basically, that is as far as our presentation, you know, is concerned. Then at the bottom there, I mean, we'll then have, you know, our contact details. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clichet. Thank you very much for the presentation and for sharing those insights with us. We will now then move on to the last chamber that we'll be hearing from today, which is the Mitchells Plain Chamber of Commerce. And we have Sean Akim here, who is the chairperson. Good afternoon, sir. Are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you. And how are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you for asking. Would you like to start by introducing your delegation?
Yes, I would. Let me first just make sure that I can share my presentation as well.
Okay, I'm just going to ask Mr. Clichet to unshare his presentation first.
Okay.
As soon as I've shared, it'll stop me from sharing.
Oh, I see. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so of the apologies which I've received, the sector head for the undertakers and funerals, Hanke McMaster, has not been able to make it. We've had a couple of apologies as it stands from our members. We have got present here our Strand Bay Business Development Forum. Sean Carstens is the chairperson that side, and we have got the Mitchells Plain Early Childhood Development Forum representative already, Karima Jacob. She is present. Just a bit of background quickly, and I'm not going to spend too much time in talking about Plain Chamber, but it helps to give some context. We specifically focused around Mitchells Plain. Been running since 2016, and we have a very different approach to normal chambers in that our focus is to be able to create a vision that carries our economy and our local community forward. Mitchells Plain is often seen as being a small little town. It is in fact an 84 square kilometer block of land that's in the Western Cape, in the city of Cape Town. It's got 2 sub-councils, and sub-council 43 starts at the Strandford Plain Pavilion, goes all the way up to Lansdowne Road, goes all the way down to Jakes Gerwel, back up to the R300. That's a huge block of land that represents what Mitchells Plain is. When you combine Mitchells Plain and Khayelitsha together, that's 120 square kilometers of land. We represent 1/3 of the labor force for the Western Cape. And in fact, when you combine Mitchells Plain and Khayelitsha, we are just under 2% below the contribution to Tygerberg's contribution to the GDP. And we are the largest contributor to GDP outside of the city of Cape Town. What's interesting about this year so far is that the pandemic and the crisis related to it has overshadowed every single month from January to now, has had major international headlines that should have been dominating the newspaper but hasn't. And that's just in the natural space. We've had the explosions in Beirut. We've had a lot of crises happening month after month this year that's gone by, and it has come at a time when Mitchells Plain has been struggling with current difficulties that we needed to deal with in any event. And having dealt with these in any event, we now find that we've had the pandemic and everything else, which has put everybody on the back foot. So understand that Mitchells Plain, before we've even had the problem, already had no space to meet, no space to collaborate. We've had no research funding. All the development which we've got, because of the fact that we've been able to be a major contributor to the GDP, has been done through the personal funds of NGOs and personal businessmen like myself and like Ikhshan, like Fazluddin Abrams, like Hankie McMaster, like Karima Jacobs. Personal funds that we were to commit to saying we're developing our local community ourselves. And so when you understand that the development of our community is heavily dependent on the small businesses who've been able to keep our local community going, and then you've had that ripped out from underneath us, it stresses how important it is that we need to reflect on what Mitchell's Plain is doing. Now, if we take a look at this period of time, there actually has been quite a few upsides. Because Mitchell's Plain is structured to be able to reach out to our poor, reach out and help, those NPOs and those organizations who meet all the criteria, who made sure that they are compliant, have actually done very well. Grants have been paid out to them, families have been fed. In fact, one of the beautiful things that is happening is the number of people who've said, I can't work, I can't do anything else. What I can do in the meantime is I'll take what's in my pantry and feed my neighbor, feed people around us. So we've been actively seeing food distribution happening. And those social enterprises who have been already humming along in the past have realized their value right now. There's been a lot of good work. But I think what's important to realize is that there have been major losses. Things that people don't realize about places like Mitchell's Plain, like Khayelitsha, like Nyanga, Gugulethu, like Philippi, is the fact that you cannot tell people not to just stay in their houses, because when they've got to go to the shop, they have to walk. They've got to walk, and they often can't walk alone because of crime. So they've got to walk in pairs or in threes. So you see this traffic constantly backwards and forwards that you can't prevent. You can't tell people whose homes, the whole property may be sitting at about 20 square meters. When people are living 5 families in a small little shack, and then those kids need to be able to break out, to be able to be away for a while, they have to go into a nearby park, they have to go out in the street, they have to go out. And so that has been a major crisis. Before the pandemic, we were making quite a bit of progress, particularly in the tourism space. We've been investing a lot of time and energy in building it. And one of the major losses for us as a chamber is our director for tourism, Cyril Williams, was taken by COVID-19 in the middle of July. It left us with a vacuum that we're trying to fill. The tourism industry, Mitchell's Plain has been providing the entertainers, the comedians, the workforce to the entertainment industry for forever. And the tourism industry in Mitchell's Plain has been decimated. Not that it hasn't been decimated in Khayelitsha or anywhere else, but it's an area that we've been able to say we've been growing slowly, and that has just been wiped out. Things that have been frustrating for us has been how, whether you're talking about, at the one side where we're talking about your funeral your funeral directors, your undertakers, who need to be able to get paperwork signed and completed, and we're finding that government departments have shut down because of the pandemic. People will be able to go and take out a bond. I have very personal experience with that. My bond application for business growth had been in the deeds office 3 days before the lockdown in March, and it's taken from then until now for me to hear that the deeds office is actually processing my applications. And in that process, you've got to take out bridging finance, which is a cost per day. And there are just so many of our small businesses who've had to suffer through that. Knowing that our small businesses have been able to try and get through this all the time, it's interesting to observe that when this meeting started, our honorable chairperson went through things which are taken as standard etiquette procedures to say this is how we expect you to act in this particular case. But inside of places like Beacon Valley, inside of places like Lentagheer, people don't know how to be able to get a computer, let alone get a computer which is going to be able to run Microsoft Teams. And if they did have something which could run with Microsoft Teams, as it is just before this meeting started, we needed to help Karima to make sure that she could join. We needed to help the next person. Being able to say that Teams is the new normal, the video conferencing is the new normal, we should engage like that. When you're struggling to have data, when the data is costing you, when you're struggling to be able to just get going. Working for an organization, working for government, working for a company, you've got an IT department that you can lean on to say, help me get Teams running so that I can engage with my people. But when you are a small creche, who do you ask for help? It's extremely challenging. Inside of just our own people, one of the most critical sectors that needs help is the early childhood development space. Remember that every entrepreneur who tries to go out and trade, who has kids, can't go out and trade unless he's figured out what to do with his kids. And if your kids have to be kept cooped up in the house and working with you while you're trying to have your Teams meetings, if you've been able to do it successfully, then you find that you're not being able to be as effective as you'd like to be, because you still need to feed a baby, you still need to change a nappy, you still need to be able to go out and keep them entertained to a certain extent. So our early childhood development centers are critical to be able to support the small businesses as they're going. And yes, while many organizations will be able to retrench 1 or 2 people, the organizations will survive. But when a small business retrenches 1 or 2 people, they in essence close their doors. So when we take a look at the fact that the ECDs in Mitchell's Plain have been struggling, a lot of them have closed their doors permanently. Not many of them know how they're going to open up. Most of them have said, actually, let's write the year off. Let's take a look at what we're going to do in January 2021. Those that have been successful at being able to apply for UIF, we find that the first UIF payment came out 6 weeks late. Many of them are still waiting for June's payment as it stands. The slow process of getting payments and the whole administrative process has been crippling for our people. And it's not just the ECD centers. The small businesses in Strandfontein are struggling like that. We've got people who represent the hawkers, and if you're not registered as a hawker, if you're just trying to trade to survive, you don't get your PPEs. We don't get the support that's needed. And so understand that in order for Mitchell's Plains businesses to survive, we rely on Mitchell's Plains businesses. We rely on the small business who spends a bit of money, makes a bit of money, and shares the bit of money that they make with their community. When you rip out that, you rip out the ability for a community to survive. One of the things that I think is important to take a look at, and I just want to share something with you, is that we see Mitchell's Plain as this town. And even when we reflect on the COVID-19 cases in the Western Cape, you see this entire section, I'm sure you can see my mouse, that section, the entire block over there, that is Ward 43. That is part of Mitchell's Plain. The numbers have not been included in this 8,300 we're talking about. If we include the numbers just from that section there, I'm guessing we should have added at least another 2,000 or 3,000 onto the numbers that we've got here. And if we did that, then we are in fact the second largest when it comes to having been impacted by COVID-19. And because the numbers aren't right, and I've written to the Premier, I've written to the Department of Health, I've said, can't we track our infections by GPS location? And I don't mean to be down to the household. You can do it in 500 meters within 1 kilometer so that you can get a true reflection of what the actual impact has been, to see where are the most infections. Because once this is over, you're wanting to say, how do we spend money on recovery? Do we make sure that Mitchell's Plain is actually sitting second and getting the second amount of support that's needed? Or do we say, no, Mitchell's Plain is actually 5th or 6th down the line? Because in fact, we were an epicenter for it for quite a while. So that's our contribution. thank you for giving me the time to at least talk about it, because our small businesses need help. We need to be able to start planning what we need to do forward. We've got many proposals, and we're actively going out and finding help on our own, and we're trying to lift ourselves up from our own bootstraps. But we do need help. We do need help, especially when the fact that we've already seen the pandemic and all the other little crises, making sure that our own ability to support ourselves has been reduced to the point where we've got to go out and say, please help. We need to know that moving forward, we can have some structured programs in place that allows us to say, how do we bring these ideas that we've got in place, how do we bring them to fruition? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Achim. Thank you very much for preparing all of that information with us and for sharing all of those insights. And we'd like to thank all the Chambers of Commerce that have presented today. We're now going to move on to the third part of our meeting today, which is an engagement with Agri Western Cape, VinPro, and the Master Builders and Allied Trade Association of the Western Cape. We have Jannie Stradum, who's the CEO of Agri Western Cape, on the line. Good afternoon. I think you might be on mute.
Thank you. Apologies
there
for
we
that.
go. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Madam Chair and all the members of the committee. And yeah, from Agri Western Cape side, thank you very much for the opportunity to share a couple of thoughts with you today regarding the pandemic and how we handle it. Yeah, we've got 7 minutes, so I'll get right into it, not to waste your time. Just on Agri Western Cape side, just to emphasize the fact that everyone on the farm's health and safety was and is still our priority since the announcement of the lockdown in March. And we really tried and made a huge effort in conveying that message to our members. So on the presentation today, what I'll be touching on is Agri Western Cape as an organization, where we fit in, and then also the impact of COVID-19 on the sector, Agri Western Cape support to the agri sector, and then just share a couple of concerns with the committee. So just on the first point, we're a member-based organization, apolitical, and we represent around about 3,700 commercial farmers in the province. And like I said in the beginning, that is our main focus, to ensure that all the regulations and the interpretation thereof and so forth being conveyed to our members, but I'll touch on that a bit later as well. So, Madam Chair, just on the impact of COVID on the sector, I think to start off, agriculture was declared an essential service from the beginning. So a lot of the commodities were able to function within the sector, although a certain amount was not or were not allowed to function. And like the previous speakers also mentioned, I mean, the impact of that is just enormous on the financial status of those sectors. So we saw in the beginning a lot of regulations being gazetted, and and the interpretation thereof was a huge challenge. And that's where we as organized agriculture tried to play a huge role. Because even if your commodity was able to operate, or your industry, there was still a lot of regulations to adhere to, and which made it quite difficult to function at optimal capacity. So we had a lot of work to do there, and hopefully we succeeded in what we achieved up to now. On the financial and operational implication side, for sure, a huge impact. One must understand when you budget for your business, these additional costs, and an initial speaker also referred to the PPEs and all the adherence to regulations. That cost is from the bottom line. It wasn't necessarily budgeted for. and had huge negative financial impact for employers in that regard. And then on the operational side as well, to the challenges in terms of working in groups, the transportation, and all of that, one had really made or had to make some innovative adjustments because, like I said right in the beginning, the main focus was and still is to protect everybody on the farm in terms of spreading the virus, flattening the curve, and so forth. So to have that in mind and to keep that in mind was quite a challenge, and still is. So the major impact or the impact on major commodities, like I said, some like the wool industry, cotton, for example, couldn't trade, couldn't operate, wasn't part of the essential list in the beginning, and therefore, it was quite a challenge to get them functional as well, because I think the major thing that we've learned through this pandemic and the lockdown is the interconnectivity between a member or participant stakeholders within the value chain, the agricultural value chain. Whether it's per commodity or just the whole chain, it's just the dependency between stakeholders is just enormous. And we saw with those couple of commodities that couldn't function or wasn't declared or weren't declared essential, we just saw the negative impact on their value chains. So industry support with regards to food supply, we were contacted the first week of the lockdown, and through our members and request. And with me also today on this meeting is John Boshoff, our head of communication, and we sent out the request for food assistance. And I must say, I take my hat off to all the donations that we've got. We supplied Food Forward SA with more than 100 tons of fresh produce, vegetables, fruit, and so forth. So just the indication that the industry really took a responsibility also for assisting certain areas where there was still is quite a need for supply of fresh fruit and produce. So the impact, if I can continue, just complying with the regulations, like I said, the additional cost that wasn't budgeted for, the various protocols that had to be implemented, and teams that had to be created on your larger farms, just to ensure that should one be tested positive, that there's no need to lock down or to close down the whole operation, but that just that section of a team or part of a team that was in contact with that person. So it was just to make it just to ensure the continuation of the business when and if somebody tested positive. And we were very strict on access, especially in spreading and flattening the curve. We know that in the rural areas, most of the farms are very far off from the cities, and the spreading of the virus shouldn't shouldn't be so severe in those areas. So to limit the spreading of it is to limit any access to the farm from outside people that might bring the virus into the setup there. So we had very strict and still have access control to the farming operations. If I can just continue then, I'm not going to dwell too long on this slide because Vinpro is also part of the session, and they will focus more specifically on their commodity. But I just want to emphasize the severe impact that the ban on the sale of alcohol had on the wine value chain. And like I said previously, that the interdependency of all the role players and stakeholders in a value chain is just, it's been highlighted and within this pandemic, and we just people or businesses that you've never thought that was linked to the agricultural sector, and especially the wine sector, we realized that through this whole ban what the impact of that was as well. So like I said, I'm not going to dwell on the figures here, Vinpro will probably refer to that in their presentation as well. Just it's some concerning figures in terms of what the outlook of for the industry, and it's a great concern for us as a sector, as an agriculture sector at this stage. And like I said, severe pressure on the consumer's disposable income and demand. We normally find when there's a drought, for example, there's a limitation on your supply side. But at this stage, or through this pandemic, and various economists referred to that already, that you had an excuse me, a pressure on the demand side, and then also a pressure on the supply side. So both in economic terms, having not a desirable outcome, and I think that's also that contributes to the financial pressure on the industry. A lot of transport restrictions, where we see, especially in the fresh produce market as well, where produce had to be transported from the markets to the consumer, had also a negative impact in that or within those sectors as well. And then also, just for example, on the potatoes, all your quick service restaurants that was closed. So your certain size, that's a bit on a practical side, your specific size of potatoes that's required for making your chips, the demand wasn't there. So and it's a perishable product, and now the producer is sitting with that, and only a certain amount can be frozen, and so just an impact that one didn't understand initially that was going to happen or take place. So we as an organization, what did we do? From the start, when the regulations were gazetted, we issued our members also with the assistance of our national body, Agri-SA, with a permit, so that they can operate and then be also transported from home to work and back. So when we were declared an essential service in the beginning. Just some of the protocols, Madam Chair. Like I said in the beginning, the transport from work and to work and back to the homes was a challenge because there was that the requirements in terms of the regulations gazetted and the social distance that had to be taken into consideration. And then, like I said, there was strict access control to farms, so going into town for shopping and so forth. In certain areas, we had shops coming out to the rural areas with a list being provided to them a day or two before, so that they can just come and do the delivery, so that we limit the exposure of people on the farm going to town. And then also a major one, as we know, we've got a lot of seasonal workers in our province, the transportation and the crossing of borders. And I must say our provincial government assisted, and our Department of Agriculture, in writing these protocols and discussing and getting to agreement with our neighbor provinces leadership as well, to accept these protocols and allow these people also to go home after the seasonal work's been completed. So just, Madam Chair, on some of the documents that we've distributed to our members, the checklist, the appointment of a safety manager, what employers need to do, employees needs to do, compensation. We heard a lot of the UIF and TERS throughout today, and also, and we know all the concerns and the issues with the paying out of that. So yeah, we also assisted as far as possible, or at least linked up the employers with the right departments to sort out the issues to be able to access those funds as well. And then all the COVID-19 directions are from the Health and Safety Department, and how we what we then here's quite a list of also what we've distributed on behalf of the Department of Health. We attended all the weekly hotspot meetings with the department and all the relative departments that was part of it, and we assisted through our structures and our communication systems. We distributed this information. And then also on infograms, through our national body, they constructed these infograms since the start, and also translated it to Xhosa, and that's what we distributed. And from our side, from Agri Western Cape side, this is just some of the notifications that we distributed. And on the administrative side, just frequently asked questions and answers, and what was needed to understand. We tried, like I said in the beginning, to convey that through to all our members. I'm just not going to stand still on these, Madam Chair. I see my time is running out as well. So this is just what we attended to and looked at and made sure that that's been understood by our members. Just on a couple of concerns to end off the session, trade restrictions posed the biggest challenge for us, especially on the profitability. We see the global recession and the anticipated decline in global economic or financial position, and then the slow recovery of tourism. And we just, again, like I said, especially in our province, and we're talking agriculture here, but I mean the interactive and the connectivity between us and tourism is just enormous, and that contributed enormously negative to our sector as well, because we're working quite hand in hand with tourism, and that caused a lot of financial constraint as well. And then the drought, we're very happy to report, and we see in the media that our dam levels are, especially the Teerwaterskloof, is in excess of 80%, and which has last been seen in 2014. So we're very happy about that, but we tend to forget the whole central Karoo, the Little Karoo, the Kanaland area, and the West Coast is still severe. There's still severe drought conditions, and I must say the lockdown didn't contribute to that, and we tend to forget of that conditions as well, and the impact of the livelihood of the rural areas regarding the drought. Rural safety was also mentioned previously, and that's a great concern for us, especially on the impact of or with regards to the unemployment that we also saw in the first presentation. That's in excess of 30% now at this stage. So in infrastructure, I would just like to emphasize the other fact that we had struggles. We did struggle at our port, but I must take my hat off to Mr. Dube, the new CEO, and what they achieved at this stage to try and rectify and to adjust to the requirements of the port at this stage. So a hat off to him. And yeah, we need to continue just to make sure that our infrastructure is in place. And then just lastly, the constant and affordable supply of energy, crucial for our sector. And yeah, we see the impact of load shedding that we can't accommodate at this stage. Madam Chair, last 4 points, just the way forward. I think this pandemic or lockdown emphasized the importance of the agriculture sector within our country, cornerstone of our economy. New marketing channels perhaps that we have to develop and look at. Inclusive growth of the sector, that's important for us as well. And then the main issue, or not issue, but the focus should be to maintain our food security. We never had a stage where our shelves were empty in the retail shops, and yeah, and that's thanks to everybody that's part of the agriculture sector, the employees, the employers, and everybody in the value chain. Madam Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I will await the questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strydom, for putting together that very comprehensive and thorough presentation. I'm sure there'll be a number of questions when we get to our Q&A. Thank you. Sorry, is there a point of order?
The chair lady, your voice, the same word comes through 4 times here. So
sorry for that. Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you.
Thank you. I just thanked Mr. Stradom for the thorough presentation, and I'm sure there are many of questions for him, but we will get to that in the Q&A. We have two more inputs before we get to Q&A. Our next input will be from VinPro. We have Mr. Rico Basson, who's the Managing Director of VinPro, with us on the line. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the House. It's a privilege to share some thoughts with you this afternoon.
Thank you. If you could introduce your delegation, and then I'll hand straight over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's very small. It's just myself and the head of wine tourism, Marisa Nieuwoud, that is here. She's just going to share some thoughts on tourism and the recovery process. So I'm going to do my best. I'm glad Mr. Stradom set the scene of agriculture, because the wine sector that I represent is part of the bigger sector, and then wine tourism as well. So I thought, in listening to the presentations, the three words that came up in terms of our lives, number one was safety, number two, uncertainty, and number three, collaboration. And I hope I'll touch on some of that. Just for members that are not that familiar with the wine sector, when we talk about the wine sector, we don't only talk about vineyards and producers, but we also talk about a very extensive value chain, which includes wineries, restaurants, and we export 50% of our wines, and 50% are sold locally, and with that, the importance of tourism. But at the bottom of the slide, I think very important is that the sector creates close to 300,000 jobs. And I often say, for every one job on a wine farm, it creates 10 other jobs, and then a massive, massive contributor to GDP. So that's just for some context on the membership that I represent, from farming all the way through to marketing and exports. The uncertainty that I want to touch on, Madam Chair, is if we look back at the past 20 weeks, in terms of wine, and you will all be familiar with the alcohol ban, one of the sectors initially, when lockdown was announced, that were not categorized as essential was wine. And I want to start there, because at that very point, we couldn't complete our harvest for 2020. And luckily, we got dispensation on the 26th to do that. Then 9 days later, we were allowed to export and transport. But soon after that, the transport of wine to harbour was not allowed. And this created havoc in our international supply chain, because we couldn't commit to our importers all over the globe. And whilst they had full understanding, it did have a reputational challenge, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. And then on the 1st of May, we were allowed to export, and with that to procure, and within that adherence, obviously, to health and safety. A month later, on the 1st of June, the local market with limited trading hours. And then recently, on the 12th of July, a ban again on local sales. And as you know, 2 weeks ago, once again, reopening. And the reason for sharing this with you, it's very difficult in this value chain where you have bottle suppliers, label suppliers, you are shipping, you are packaging, to have this disruption, and it caused havoc along the line. The implication of this is severe for the wine sector, and if we count just the direct losses at the top of the page, we are at 7.5 billion rand that has been lost in direct revenue, which is severe for a fairly medium-sized industry. With that, if we look at the top, the domestic volume being sold, and at the bottom, the export volume, the lack of trade means that our revenue and the turnover and sales of wine will be severely down. Whilst we see a recovery in years to come, the implication to the right-hand side are numerous, amongst other that we will probably sit with surplus stock at the end of the year, and we are in a position where we will not be able to harvest a section of the 2021 crop. With that, huge challenges on cash flow, as you can think. We think that the price of wine at the farm gate, unless we have interventions, can drop with 50%, and severe job losses. A lot of the speakers touched on that. We do think, unfortunately, without assistance, there will be severe job losses. We see it already. And we also forecast that about 15% of the sector will close down. That's 80 wineries, 350 producers, and a severe impact on the wine sector. I'm not going to elaborate too much. I think we are glad about the Cape Town port, and well done to Portnet and Transnet, but it creates a challenge. And the point I want to make is that this sector, without some assistance, will look vastly different and will take very long to recover. I want to go back to our discussions with government all along, but most certainly from lockdown. And we immediately engage with government at various levels, various departments, and the themes that we discussed is obviously the health and safety, social distancing, but also the interventions needed for gender-based violence, drinking and driving and walking, illicit trade, which has been rife, as well as the economic impact. And it's too much detail to share. We crafted solutions. And as we speak, we have concluded a social compact framework at NETLAC, where I know some of the organizations that presented it this afternoon were also involved. And we do think this is the framework in terms of alcohol and a partnership with government, Department of Health, DTI, and others, also Western Cape provincially and others, around the interventions needed for drinking and driving, binge drinking, underage drinking, and gender-based violence. And I think that's the way to approach it versus a blanket slate ban. But we can come back to that in question time. More back on the farm level, your question of what did we do differently? We upped the focus on counseling, and one of the innovations that we started rolling out 6 weeks ago is to deploy 30 aware ambassadors. These are female employees that will assist with counseling across this wine sector, from the psychological impact to harm reduction aspects, also looking at the fair label practice, and as Mr. Stradom said, food parcels and in general humanitarian assistance. So a lot of new things that came about, but most certainly a big focus on the socioeconomic side. I want to ask Marisa to just talk to the wine tourism impact as well as the recovery, and then I'll end off my presentation.
Thank you, Rico. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Wine tourism, existing at the intersection of agriculture and tourism as it does, has been particularly hard hit by the lockdown regulations relating to the on-consumption sale of wine and travel restrictions. In 2019, the sector contributed 7.2 billion rand to South Africa's GDP. Based on this economic data, we estimate that by the end of July this year, we had lost 2.5 billion rand in revenue. And if the international borders do not open for travel before 2021, that amount is likely to increase to 4.9 billion. So that will rise quite sharply. Our efforts in terms of recovery has been focused on 3 stages from the outset. In the interest of time, I'm not going to delve into all of the information on the slides, but I do want to highlight for you what our objective has been with each stage and what level of support we would really value from our stakeholders and our partners. So firstly, to sustain the wine tourism supply, to minimize the winery closures and to minimize job losses in rural areas where people have quite low prospects of re-employment. And here we're looking at tourism supply support funding. Yanni has alluded to it, Rico spoke to it as well, to help our businesses cover those or to subsidize the costs of reopening with stringent health and safety protocols in place. and further to support. Secondly, we believe that a very strong domestic demand-driven tourism campaign is necessary to get our domestic visitors to travel to our wineries and to reignite that demand. And then finally, how do we create an environment that strengthens the industry, that's enabling and that gives them the right capabilities to deal with this challenge? There we are looking specifically at business and skills development support for the industry. Thank you, Rico.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, in essence of time, I'm not going to delve too much into detail, but when we talk innovation, part of sitting with a big wine glut at the moment is to look at alternatives for wine. And I think the only thing I want to touch on at the moment, we are looking at making hand sanitizer out of wine. We're looking at distilling wine into spirits for export. We are looking at wine juice, grape juice, and different innovations, which I think is a longer discussion. But we have also approached government nationally as well as provincial for assistance. The losses has been enormous. Talking to Treasury around excise dispensation, the sector pays about 7 billion rand of taxation. And also tourism recovery, assistance to transformation, etc. So whilst the amounts look significant, I think if we don't find mechanisms to support the sector as well as the supply chain, we will have a disaster in terms of the sector in the next couple of months. So I end off with this slide. I think, as previous speaker says, I think the health and safety of our employees and our customers are paramount, and I think that goes without saying. I want to emphasize that the sector is a significant employer of labor. A lot of that is in rural communities, and the dependency on that labor is significant. You can times it by 5, which means you've got a severe impact socioeconomically. I did speak about the decline and the collapse in prices, which will have devastating impacts. And then Marisa touched on tourism and the need for a partnership with government. So, Madam Chair, I'm going to stop there, and I'd rather take questions later on in terms of some of the aspects that I've raised.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Basson and Ms. Nivot, for that information and some really disturbing figures coming out of that presentation. We're going to move on to the final input today before we get to questions and answers, and that is from the Master Builders and Allied Trades Association of the Western Cape. I believe we have Mr. Dion Bester, who's the Health and Safety Manager, on the line. Is that correct? Are you on the line, Mr. Bester?
Madam Chair, I am on the line.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Do you have a delegation here if you'd like to introduce them?
At the moment, it's myself. I'm the Occupational Health and Safety Manager for the Master Builders Association, and my colleague, Des Patterson, is here. She will be doing the first introduction, and then I'll take over from there and talk to the reality of construction health and safety as it currently stands.
Thank you. Please be welcome. And in the interest of time, I'll hand straight over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if Des is able to jump on and do her part of the presentation. Des, are you able to do that?
Hi, good day, everybody. I'm just struggling to get the presentation up. Let me just try again here.
If not, I could ask our procedural officer to share your presentation.
Could you please? I'm struggling to get it.
Ms. Adams, would you be able to share the presentation, please?
Thanks, Jay.
Super. Thank you very much. Okay.
There we go. Thank you.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and honourable members of the committee. We thank you for the opportunity given to the Master Builders to participate in this forum today. As Leon said, my name is Des Patterson, and I look after operations at the MBA. The construction industry is, it's been widely reported on over the past number of years, has been under enormous strain for various reasons, and obviously the introduction of COVID-19 has now been an additional challenge which has faced the industry. And also widely reported that construction was one of the industries that was most affected by the pandemic. So just for those who don't know what the MBA is, we're a voluntary association. We were established in the late 1800s, and therefore one of the oldest associations of its kind in South Africa. Our membership comprises around 400 members, and that goes across the whole cross-section of the built environment, contractors, subcontractors, and suppliers, and obviously the professional community. We are an autonomous organization, but we are affiliated to Master Builders South Africa in a federated model. And we're a strong advocate for the built environment in the Western Cape. The MBAs all over the country, so we're one of 7 MBAs, and our area really covers the Western Cape region. Part of what we do is we provide our members with advice. We provide them with networking opportunities, training, a very big component of what we do. And then obviously occupational health and safety, and this pandemic falls obviously very much in that area of what we cover. Could you move on to the next slide, please? So in terms of COVID-19 and the interventions that the MBA have done for our members, one of the biggest things was communication. I think everybody knows that we were on the receiving end of a large hosepipe of information which was being poured out over the country. And one of the things that we did was we disseminated information, filtered information that was relevant to our members on a weekly basis. We put out bulletins which then fed them information. They knew that the information they were receiving from us was pertinent to them and also not fake news. There was a lot of fake news that was going on around. I'll let Dion speak a bit more about the health and safety protocols that were put out, but we did a lot of work around those. The Bargaining Council we form part of the Bargaining Council as the major labor, as the major employer party. And one of the things that the Bargaining Council did right at the outset in response to the plight of many of the employees who were very suddenly without any kind of employment, was to pay out their holiday fund money at the outset of the pandemic, which gave them some cash flow until the UIF tours kicked in. So the BRBC has also been very supportive of the industry through this time. The MBA South Africa also launched a COVID-19 rapid response team, and MBA Western Cape also participated in that. And one of the things that we were able to achieve as the rapid response team was to lobby government together with many other organizations, but to lobby government to allow construction to recommence in level 3, which, as you know, we were only originally going to recommence at level 2 or level 1. So that was something that we did as part of our interventions on behalf of our members. UIF tours was a very big part. It was actually just recently reported that in the construction industry, 86% of the employees' income was reliant on UIF tours during this time. Unfortunately, it was an area where I think government let the South Africans down quite considerably, and we worked very hard with our members to try and assist them in getting these funds to the employees. I must at this point mention that there's the red tape reduction unit within the Provincial Western Cape government, and in the person of Cindy Wilkinson, worked very hard with us in trying to unlock all the bureaucracy around this. I think both of her and I were pulling our hair out in the end in trying to get answers for our employees. We had 64 companies representing about 2,500 employees who were really struggling until quite recently to still get money out. And as was mentioned earlier, payments have now stopped. So that's an ongoing battle, and one that I think really needs some serious investigation into. I'll hand over to Dion now, who will talk more about the health and safety aspects of COVID-19 in construction. Dion?
Thank you very much, Des, and thank you for giving us this opportunity, Madam Chair and honourable members. I'm going to go through this quite briefly. I think what's very important to note is that despite all the reservations, we've had a minimal number of incidents reported on construction sites, which is very, very encouraging. And I think this is due to the fact that they've got very, very well managed site protocols in place, which contains obviously screening on entry to sites. This is very, very strictly controlled. I've been onto a number of sites and I've never got into a site without being properly screened. What's also important is the keeping of the records of all persons on site in the case of having to do any contact tracing. One of the things, of course, is the strict monitoring of the use of cloth face masks, and of course avoiding close contact where possible. No one needs to understand that in the realm of construction, social distancing is not always applicable and not always practical to do. Another issue as well that's also very difficult to manage is the remote working. It might sound silly, but obviously a bricklayer cannot work from home. The same goes for management. Most of the management on site are pretty hands-on, and they needed to be there to ensure the smooth flow of the processes on site. Can you just move to the next slide for me, please? Yeah, then okay, thank you very much. So the evidence that I've managed to glean and the information I have is that it appears as if there's been minimal transmissions on site. So it appears as if the persons that are becoming ill are getting it through interactions off-site with their family and through social contact. So it appears as if we haven't really got any issues with people getting in on site. But of course, there's no real good data or sources of infection. So we're relying on what it is we've been told. What's quite interesting to note is that the types of people that are becoming infected are mostly junior / middle management supervisors and young engineers on site. And the sort of anecdotal evidence would suggest is that the younger people have got slightly different lifestyles and possibly aren't adhering to the social distancing that they need to adhere to. So that's been a very interesting factor that we've seen out there. And of course, what has been most important is providing sufficient hand washing, sanitizing facilities on site. Most of the sites have also put areas in place where people can have their lunch and where meetings can take place with clear partitioning, sufficient spacing between people, staggering of meal times, staggering of meeting times, once again, to avoid contact. The one thing that one needs to understand, and I think it's very important, is that a dust mask, a cloth mask is there to protect people from you. So the cloth mask you are wearing is there to protect your fellow workers and your friends and people in public. And we mustn't lose sight of the fact that normal PPE is still required on a construction site. So if one is working in a dusty area, a cloth mask is not sufficient and one needs to wear a proper dust mask. And I think this is something that we've seen take a bit of a backseat, in the sense that the concentration on COVID has been upward in everybody's minds, and unfortunately we've seen a little bit of a slacking off in the safety side. And it's interesting to note that some of the previous speakers have spoken about the health aspects that have become far more relevant now than they've ever been. And we tend to forget that we talk about occupational health and safety. Safety has always been foremost in this. We believe that the economic impact at the moment is probably still too soon to really tell. I think we're going to see a long-lasting effect, as all the other speakers have said. And in our sector, it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next 6, 12 to 18 months. Could you just move on the next slide for me, please? Thank you. So some of the challenges we faced is transporting workers to site. As you all well know, that most or a large percentage of our workforce are transported on company vehicles, open vehicles, on the back of bakkies. So social distancing and minimizing numbers on there is very, very challenging. Of course, public transport is also a bit of an issue. The supply of PPE, not so much availability, but a lot of it goes about increased costs. People have obviously jumped on the bandwagon. And I think something that's very important, and I think this is an ongoing problem, is people don't understand the gravity of the situation. I've had the opportunity now to speak to a number of people who have had COVID, and I'm quite horrified at how ill some of these people have been. So we need to get that message across, and it's still a situation. I think it's very important, as I said previously, that we observe normal health and safety protocols. And another issue that's quite important is in our industry, there's a large use of subcontractors on sites, and we need to continuously remind these subcontractors that they remain employers and that they too need to take responsibility for the health and safety of their own employees. And that means making sure that their employees are fit to come to work before they come to work. And then, of course, the other issue is teaching or getting our employees to self-monitor, to understand the symptoms and to not come to work if they are ill. Some of the challenges we have in terms of getting the industry back up and going, it's common knowledge that the construction industry has been in a decline over a number of years, with a lot of the major companies going into business rescue and shutting down. So something that needs to happen urgently is infrastructure projects need to be brought online. That would be both national and a regional government. We need those projects. Currently, the private sector is essentially propping up the industry in the Western Cape. And just touching on that, it's quite interesting to note that the private sector, and specifically in the domestic sector, there's been a decline in the amount of work there, and this is partially to the plan approval system through the City of Cape Town is very onerous and time consuming, and it just seems to take forever to get a plan passed. And in many instances, when a feasibility study has been done on a project, by the time the plans are passed, that feasibility study or the feasibility of that project is no longer in place and often would be cancelled. This is specifically around housing and apartments. So we also have an issue around payment. I'm sure that's common knowledge that often on government projects, payment to the contractor remains a problem. And then I think it's I'm not going to say it without the state of the economy in South Africa is just what it is at the moment, and I think it's the COVID has just exacerbated what was already a very bad situation, and I really believe that, and I said this earlier, I think we don't really know what the impact, or we haven't seen the worst of the impact on the economy and specifically on our construction sector, who employs probably 30-odd thousand people in the Western Cape, and is a large contributor to the GDP in the Western Cape. Madam Chair, I'll leave it at there and field any questions later.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bester from the Master Builders and Allied Trades Association of the Western Cape. Thank you to all those that presented to us today. We're now going to move on to a round of questions and answers, but I think we're just going to take a 3-minute leg stretch, and we will then reconvene the meeting at 3:05 for the Q&A. Thank you, members. If you'd all stay on the line, do not leave the line, just mute, and we'll see you in 3 or 4 minutes. Thank you. Right, it's just gone 5 minutes past 3, and we're returning to this ad hoc committee on COVID-19 of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. We're now going to move into our first round of questions from the members. I'm sure there are many. As usual, we will start the questions by giving each political party 3 minutes. And so if political parties would have their questions ready. For the organizations, could I ask if you could take note of the questions for your organization until the first round of questions have been asked, and then I'll recognize each of you to respond. And then hopefully we'll have time for further rounds of questions thereafter. So 3 minutes per party. As usual, we are then going to start with the DA. Are there any questions from the DA, please? Honourable Bartman, over to...
Thank you, Chairperson Deirdre Bartman. Chairperson, I would like to start with just saying that it's been very tragic to hear about some of the impacts that the regulations have had on businesses. Small business is not only enterprises, but they help empower individuals and they give them dignity. And if you support small business, you often support a family. It's horrible to hear things like the fact that the title deed office was closed, that because of that, some businesses have had to approach bridging finance options, or that businesses are closing their doors and retrenching people because of the impact that the regulations may have had. It's obviously easier to assist a business when it's still open compared to when it has closed. And I would like to thank all the organizations and unions and businesses and chambers who have been assisting their members during this very difficult time that our country has been going through. And especially in the sectors of tourism and agriculture and construction, given the impact it specifically has on the Western Cape economy. In terms of questions, Chairperson, in terms of UIF, I would like to know from the organizations how many of the payments or lack of payments have affected businesses in terms of UIF. Have the chambers received any complaints of more than 1 month of UIF payments not being paid out? I know that, for example, in some businesses have received payments for some employees, but not for others. And those businesses have had to, for example, spread the money out so that everyone can have a little bit of the pie and so that no one loses their jobs. And I would like to know whether anything similar has occurred to businesses. In terms of tourism, I'm not sure if any of the chambers represent tourism businesses specifically, but I wanted to find out if they know of any tour guides who have been paid out already from the National Tourism Relief Fund, because we haven't received any information yet regarding that. And in terms of load shedding, closer to the end of lockdown, we've started experiencing load shedding again. And it's not just the act of putting off the lights, it's also the effect that it has on equipment within the various industries. And I just wanted to find out whether the load shedding during the COVID time has impacted on the businesses, and if so, how? And then in terms of PPE procurement, I wanted to just find out whether we could perhaps later then ask the department to engage various chambers and organizations who've presented today on policies for procurement, if they haven't been engaged with the department on that front yet, especially to engage whether there are specific requirements for small business and or individuals in order to adhere when they do their respective applications. And then finally, Chairperson, I would like to know whether the chambers and organizations and unions, whether the people that they represent have applied for some of the national relief funds that actually are more loans than there are relief funds. I've spoken to 2 businesses within Cape Town who did not want to apply to some of the relief funds because they were actually loans and they were scared of not being able to pay them back. And I can completely understand that something like that would impact upon the future financial sustainability of a business. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable Bartman. I'll then hand over to the ANC. Are there any questions from the ANC, please?
Yes, Chairperson, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Honourable Nkondlo. Please proceed.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chairperson. I would like to thank you for the presentations first. I'd like to ask a question firstly, I think to the master builders. I saw that the membership is 400 members. Can I get an indication in terms of the definition of small contractors? What percentage are those? And what definition in terms of the SMME Act would they define a small contractor? That's the first one. And also I would like to know at this point how much has their companies paid out, in terms of the UIF to date, and if there's any outstanding at this point. And the last one to them is that what has been the situation of construction projects in the municipalities? And I'm raising this because I've also been inundated with some small or emerging contractors that would complain about, their projects that have not been opened up by the municipalities on the basis that, some are being reviewed and some of them small maintenance projects in that regard. Then to VinPro, I just want to know, in terms of the black brands that they're talking about, which they say there in terms of assistance, they need about 8 million. What percentage is this in the bigger wine industry? What percentage are we talking about in terms of black brands? And I just want to check with VinPro, are they aware that these black brands, I just received this morning that they are having a protest tomorrow around issues of transformation, alleging, and I would be happy if they can confirm this, that there are no, at this point, there is 0% black ownership of sellers. So exactly when you talk black brands, what are you talking about? Is it just people that are bottling existing wine brands? If you can explain that to me. The last one, Chair, I think is on I think BBC and around tourism, is that in terms of the informal traders, the issues of permits during level 5 and level 4, what has been their experience as the Black Business Chamber, of the ease of getting, of securing for their members these permits from the municipalities? Can they just share that particular experience? And what are the SMME, in terms of the relief funds that have been given, what percentage in our province and across these regions of ours can they say we received, if they do have that figure, the funding support, including, I think, what Honorable Batman was asking about the tourism funds. Do they have any records of any of their members who had actually received some of these tourism-related funding? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Nkondlo. The EFF is not in our meeting today. I'll then hand over to the Good Party.
Thank you, Chairperson. I also want to ask questions about the UIF tourism, maybe particularly to the business chambers. I think the Black Business Chamber and Mitchell's Plain may still be on the line with us. In particular about the impact of tours on saving jobs of their members' employees, and then whether their members have also been complaining or have raised issues with their chambers or their organizations around the suspension of the TERS payment, which seems to have impacted some people who've applied for June, and what the impact of that has been and how they have addressed the suspension of payment. And then to VinPro, I would like to ask about their, I'm not sure if it was a call for help or whether this is something that they are engaging with government about. They mentioned 2 funding programs that they were looking for: a tourism supply support funding and then a wine tourism campaign fund. I don't know if those funds are planned or whether they are asking government to implement those funds. And if so, what have they done about it and who are they dealing with? And then on their next slide, they indicated a breakdown of funding that they were looking for, and a total of about 484 million rand. And I just would like to know whether that is what comprises the Tourism Supply Fund and the Wine Tourism Campaign Fund. And then finally, to Master Builders, the comment around the bureaucracy with the UIF TERS. From my understanding, for most companies, when their affairs were in order, the process was not that difficult. So I'm wondering why they had 64 companies who struggled to process UIF TERS applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Heron. I will now recognise the ACDP.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to all the presenters. There's, of course, a lot of questions, but I'm not going to ask all the questions. Just maybe the first question to Fidusa, and Fidusa saying that the Western Cape government is not effective in its role in communities. What do they mean when they say that they are not very effective in the role of communities? And then I just want to go to the Black Business Chamber. And I think the Plain Chamber also spoke about the same things. The Black Business Chamber spoke about, of course, you know, the data and the shortage of laptops and so on. Did they? And then he also, the gentleman also made a remark to say that when it came to the securing of PPEs, that many of their businesses were sidelined, or if they were not sidelined, maybe they did not get the relevant information to acquire, you know, tenders and so on. If you can just elaborate on that, what did they do as a chamber, and who did they speak to? Who did they approach? If we can just get maybe some, because he said a lot of the members are informal, spaza shops, and all those type of things. The Plain Chamber, of course, spoke about, you know, we know Mitchell's Plain, and they already had problems prior to COVID and the lockdown. You know, how did, you know, he spoke about the practical problems and also small business, ECDs, and data is so expensive, and laptops. How and a lot of the initiative they fund themselves. Also, if they can tell us, you know, with who do they speak to, and you know, how do we take the Mitchell's Plain, the Plain business forward, and maybe how who did they approach us at provincial government, and maybe just give us something on that. And then, Chairperson, the final thing, and there's a lot of other stuff, but the final thing is just. If I look at the one organization that spoke, I think Agri Western Cape that spoke. Now with the lockdown, there was of course, you know, sometimes the media take it out of proportion, but there was of course said, you know, people leaving the Western Cape, coming into the Western Cape, you know, talking about the seasonal farm workers, about COVID problems there, and also people not receiving, the workers on the farms not receiving PPEs. There was a lot of, and he gave us a good presentation. And I just want to know, you know, were there issues of workers that had to work without PPEs? Were the workers going out of the Western into the Western Cape, you know, that was not checked, and those type of things. But finally, is also we spoke about it so many times, the security at our farms, you know, the safety of our farmers and our farm workers. If you can just give us an update on that, and how the Western Cape government has assisted with that, because that is also still a big problem. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable Christians. All right, so I'm going to hand over to the organisations now. If I could please ask that your inputs be as brief as possible. There were a number of questions to the chambers. I'm going to start with the BBC.
Good day once again. Renee, my colleague, as well as Mr. Ngame, they are also going to help me in terms of answering these questions. But I am going to start with the question from the last speaker, where he is asking very important questions, more especially with regards to SMMEs having access, to those PEE, procurement opportunities. So our answer there, I think it should go this way. It's more about a policy, more than it's about us talking to a specific, individual and all that. What we are saying there is that the policies, generally, and then it's even becoming worse now, during this COVID, period. The policies, they are not favoring the participation of small businesses. No, we're being generally. And once again, if I were to make just a typical example, if we look, at some of the hindrances, more especially in the Western Cape, context, we are having a supplier database, at a national level, which is central supplier database. But once again, you find another supplier base, in the context, of the province. You see those smaller, things, they are actually frustrating in terms of a small business, having to participate effectively in terms of, participating into a grander scheme of things. So in a nutshell, there is not a specific individual that we had, approached to say that, look, these are the challenges. But once again, these are the policy related, issues, that needs actually to be addressed, because it's even becoming worse now, during this COVID period. So I'm going to hand over to my colleagues as well to take, the rest of the questions. Renee.
Hi there. Sorry, if I can just comment also on the steps that we as the Chamber has taken. We've also gone out in our own individual capacities, where we've gone out to the spaza shops, tried to see how we could assist them, and we work hand in hand with CEDA and CIFA to assist them to understand how to apply for permits, what to do. They've been very supportive and helpful. We've gone into the townships. They go and address. We have a pipeline report that addresses who we've seen, what's been done, what's outstanding. So every fortnight we address whatever's going on that pipeline report. We have meetings with CIFA and CEDA where we try and help most of our members to become compliant. And I think that's the biggest challenge our community is having, is that even if they try to apply for funds, there's a compliance issue. People don't know how to get onto the next level to either obtain the finance, even for businesses. The banks were very specific that if you were post-COVID, you were doing fairly reasonably well and you were managing your business, you would then qualify for funds. So most of our and if you look specifically in the construction sector, between November, December, the construction closes early December, it opens late January. So if you're going to look at a 3-month bank statement, it's not going to look very favorable because the industry shut down. So what the result is, most of our guys don't get, we actually did a monkey survey, or the app is called Monkey Survey, but we did a survey to say, okay, who received funds, what was your experiences, trying to get information just to see where the problems lied, how can we resolve and help them. And like I said, we've then got on board with CFANCIDA. They've been assisting us. It's ongoing. It's a pipeline report up until the time, and we have a goal that by the end of the financial year, we would have at least have about 1,000 of our community applicants on our database that will be funded, and it's a work in progress at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I then hand over to the Mitchells Plain Chamber for some brief responses?
With pleasure. Thank you so much for at least acknowledging us, to Honourable Bartman, to Nkonlo, and to Honourable Christians. The questions, I think, touch us very close to our hearts. We're an organization that looks after different sectors. I'd like some of these things which are particularly pertinent to the construction. I'd like to hand over to the representative for that, who's Mr. Ihsan Carstens. He's also the chairperson of the Strand Bay Business Development Forum. And there are 3 particular issues that he wants to deal with in response to that. And then secondly, I'd like to hand over to Ms. Karima Jacobs, who's responsible for the ECDs in the area, and they've got quite a bit to give feedback around the UIF. And then there are a couple of other strings that I'd like to tie up myself. So let me first give over to Ihsan, who's got 3 particular important points he wants to raise. Remember just to unmute yourself, Ihsan.
Good day, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
Good afternoon to Madam Chair, as well as all the delegates. My name is Ihsan Carstens, and I'm the resident in Mitchells Plain, Strandfontein in particular. So I am with the Chamber, and my membership, which is the Strand Bay Business Development Forum, are member of the Plain Chamber. In our area, being basically, I am in the construction industry. We've got certain issues that has been pestering us here in Mitchells Plain. One of the things is the process involving the parcels of plans is very tedious and a long drawn out process. Now that the local office, which was in Mitchells Plain, has been moved out of the area to Khayelitsha, it's even more challenging. So we as business owners now have to go where there's even more people on a smaller place that's got to be dealt with. How can we resolve that issue to re-look at that and bring back to Mitchells Plain, which is one of the biggest areas where one of the most contractors are residing and needs to get this stuff sorted out? How can we look at maybe centralizing that particular or localizing that particular work, the particular office again back to Mitchells Plain? That's the one thing. The second part is most small businesses have challenges with the department's requirements for qualifying for compliance. So we need to have levels of acceptance because not all SMEs are on different levels. So we need to have those that don't have the much needed funds to be able to cover that maybe on a lower level. So there is one of the issues also that is going on, that most of businesses are operating without compliances because they cannot get themselves compliant. How do we go about that to resolve that? Thank you in that respect. Then in Mitchells Plain and particularly in Strandfontein, we have many massive projects implemented, which is worth hundreds of millions of rands, and the local communities as well as the business forums and contractors are not invited and included to benefit from most of these projects. Most of the projects, when it goes through the tender process, we should be involved at that stage already and sit down and say, what can the local community and local business forums and chamber contribute by giving their people a chance to be part of the project so that they can also be uplifted economically, as well as put them on a stage where they were last year, they're not supposed to be again here this year, so that we can improve all our business people up to a higher level per annual. And that is basically what I've asked. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
And then Karima will talk to the ECD and the UIF issues and the things which she's experienced.
Everybody, I'm Karima Jacobs. I'm a member of the Mitchells Plain Educare Forum. Now, the challenges that the educators have picked up during the COVID or the TERS applications, most of the educators in Mitchell's Plain is not necessarily registered with the Labour Department for various reasons. But those who are registered, they struggled to get onto the TERS because firstly, lack of knowledge, especially technological knowledge, and lack of resources because many of the educators don't have laptops and computers and so on. Contacting the TERS call center was also very expensive for the centers, for the principals, because they don't necessarily have landlines and using their cell phones. Wi-Fi data is a huge problem. The late payments that came in May for April and then came in June for May, that was also late. Up until today, a lot of centers have not received June payment. The last payment that was made was like in the first week of June. So June's payment has not been made yet, so let alone July and August. So obviously, the salaries have not been paid because only 30% of the Cape Met and Western Cape receive subsidies from the Department of Social Development. So 70% of the centers receive their salaries by way of school fees only. So obviously for these past few months, the educators have not been receiving a salary. They can't obviously also apply for the 350 Rand because they are employed, and I say that in brackets. So we are in dire straits and in great need financially as far as the early childhood development centers are concerned and the UIF. So we need some serious intervention here. Thank you.
With regards to some of the questions which are asked in particular, I think that that everybody knows the issues with UIF, and I think that's answered reasonably well. But when it came to tourism relief funds, our major loss was the person who was responsible for that, who was driving it, passed away. That's left a huge vacuum. And up until last night, we're chasing it around, trying to find a way to replace that. And we do need help. Before lockdown, we had quite a bit of work which we were doing, wanting to establish a tourism office in Mitchell's Plain that could bring these together, and we do need help with that moving forward. But the question, so when it comes to the Tourism Relief Fund, we don't have a champion who's been chasing after. We need help, so I'd be open to any conversations, any assistance which we can get for that. The next question. Honourable Bartman asked and I love the question she has asked because I think that they come so close to our actual needs where we are here right now. The question of load shedding. This is an environment where many of the people in Mitchell's Plain would be buying a second-hand fridge already as it is, because they're not going to be going into your Geen and Richards and Hirsch's and buying a brand new fridge, one of those Smegs kind of things. And when you've got load shedding and your second-hand fridge gets damaged because of load shedding, it's your problem. You've got to figure it out. When your laptop's hard drive crashes because it's a second-hand laptop because you're trying to get through to keep it working, and nobody can help you to fix that, then it's a problem. When you've got load shedding and people are saying that this is the new reality where you're supposed to be online and you can't get online because Telkom and Cell C and everybody else haven't got battery backups lasting longer than 3 load shedding blocks of time. So you're getting your internet access from the next area, the next zone, and you've gone down. So internet access by you is down, and then it's down in the next stage, and it keeps rolling. You end up losing a day. So many people have to look at writing it off any operation around that particular space. Ikshan has spoken to the cost of compliance. We're wanting to take a look at, is there a way that we can assist with that? And yes, the biggest challenge is every small business knows you're not going to want to get into more debt right now while you know you're going to be suffering, because that debt which you're going to have to recover, we know the prices are going to be increasing when all this is over because people have to recover. Getting yourself into more debt right now through loans is irresponsible. So the right thing to do for many people is just tighten the belt and live through this process. We can't afford to get our people into more debt as it stands. We would like to be able to not get loans. We don't want grants either. The thing which helps our small businesses get out of the situation is business. We'd like to know that we get business. We know that many of the large businesses are supposed to be allocating 36% of their business to small businesses, to black-owned businesses, and we know it's not happening. We'd like to be able to know that there's some kind of system in place that helps us to go to companies. Can we all start declaring on some kind of dashboard, on some kind of system that says, have you met that requirement? Because, for example, in Mitchell's Plain, the Fushini Group, the Checkers Group, Pick n Pay, they are all in the Tygerberg regions. They are all outside of the space, but we don't know how much they're buying from us locally. We're not interested in loans, not interested in handouts. We're not yet trying to beg. What we are saying is we can actually compete very effectively in the marketplace. Give us the opportunity, please. Help us to be able to bring people into our area to help grow the business. Where you've got a budget that is saying, let's spend money on advertising, let's see if we can help people from Mitchell's Plain to be able to get some of that work. That is real help. Telling us that we can go to the bank and get a bigger loan doesn't help. We'd like to be able to see business sponsored and business sponsoring business. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'll then hand over to the Master Builders Association for a brief response.
Hi there, this is Des Patterson. I will cover the UIF component and then hand over to Dion Bedford to do the second part. So just in response to perhaps first the comment around the fact that companies that had everything in order, the process went smoother. Yes, I completely concur with that. There were examples of that in our industry. However, as a result of the initial request by UIF2 to the various industries to have the bargaining councils do the submission on behalf of the industry, that was the way the industry went, and an application was made, a single application was made by the bargaining council to UIF2s on behalf of our members. Unfortunately, that process fell apart as the process wasn't followed properly by UIF2. So when there was a rejection of the file that went in, all the responses went directly to the employer bodies instead of going back to the BRBC. Anyway, long story short, it caused a lot of drama for the industry and especially for our members. So there were issues with the submissions right from the get-go, which then caused huge problems for our member organizations. And hence we sat with 64 companies representing 2,500 people that weren't getting paid. Slowly but surely we're working through them. As at a few weeks ago, I haven't got the most up-to-date stats, but we still were sitting with about 20% of the employees not having received payments for April and May, and about 27% still for June. So as I mentioned to you, I have been working with the red tape reduction unit to try and unlock some of these issues, but it has been very difficult to try and get either a response from UIF2s or just somebody that will take ownership and run with these companies that are still struggling. I'm not sure if that answers the question regarding UIF chairs. For the, I mentioned also earlier, 86% of the employees in the industry relied on this income. So it's caused enormous problems for the employer parties as well, because eventually the employees didn't want to even believe that the companies weren't paid out. So it caused a lot of friction between employer and employee parties in the industry as well. I'll hand over to Dion if I may.
Thank you. Is there anything further that you'd like to add, Mr. Bester?
Yes. Okay, one of the questions that was asked was, do we know of anybody that's applied for National Relief Fund? As far as we can establish, we don't know of any contractors that have applied for that fund. And then answering the question with regards to membership, SMMEs, how we define them. So let me start off by saying we have around about 400 members, and of which around 70% of our membership comprises contractors. And of that 70%, around 10% of that would be deemed to be larger contractors. And then a very high number of subcontractors, from the smallest of bricklaying subcontractors all the way through to the largest of subcontractors. So our membership comprises, we don't define SMMEs. I will just put that out there immediately. We don't have a membership directory that says this person is an SMME. We divide our membership up in categories, and the categories in which we place a contract is a category which he or she chooses to be placed in, based on their main work that they do, their primary focus of the company. So one of the things that we do, and I think members need to understand and hear what I'm about to say, is as a voluntary organization, we are party to the collective agreement with the BIBC signed into power by the Minister of Employment and Labour, which is a statutory requirement. And any person wishing to join, or any company wishing to join our association, has to comply with all statutory requirements, and one of them being registered and in good standing with the Building Industries Bargaining Council. And there's a variety of benefits that the company derives from that, and there's a huge variety of benefits that the individual derives from it. And Des has spoken to the payout that these employees received, and it was only paid out to members, to employees that were registered and whose companies were compliant. So one can imagine that there's a fairly large informal sector out there, and we know a lot of contractors aren't registered with the Building Industries Bargaining Council, and they're employing people at rates of pay that are probably criminal. So the BIBC is very, very clear that on what rates of pay need to be paid to people. There's the holiday fund that's there. There's a training levy. We provide training to people. So we don't define, we don't break up our membership into SMMEs or not. Everybody has an equal opportunity to be a member. What we have done, however, is we have had a training program we introduced last year, aimed specifically at BEE companies, emerging contractors. It was a program we ran for 6 months in conjunction with the University of the Western Cape. And the program was aimed at teaching people entrepreneurial skills and how to manage and run their businesses, covering a variety of subjects, business management, how to put a tender together, health and safety, and a variety of other things. And we had 30 people on this training program. The other thing one also needs to understand is that the CIDB also has a rating system, the Construction Industries Development Board, and they have a number of SMMEs that would be part of their organization as well. So to put it, just to reiterate, is our organization is open to anybody and everybody who wishes to join and who wishes to make use of the services we offer. We do have a category of membership that we call candidate, And that's particularly aimed at the very small companies that are starting up maybe a year, maybe 6 months into their business. And the idea is that they come in and that we help them wherever they want help to get their business in order. Okay, I think I've answered all the questions there. The other one was around, sorry, Madam Speaker. The other one was just around projects and municipalities. I don't have exact numbers. I think the CIDB would be better placed to give those figures, but anecdotally, I can say that we have heard that there are a number of projects that have been put on hold. Just for instance, the airport projects have put on hold. That's R1 billion that was put on hold. Now, that doesn't only affect the large contractor that was going to do it. It affects all the smaller businesses that would have been involved, the 30-odd subcontractors that would have been supplying services to that site. But in terms of the municipal jobs and I think obviously the rural areas, I think that's something that the City of Cape Town and the various metros would be better placed to answer as to where those projects sit currently and when do they anticipate these projects going forward. Thank you, Madam.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Bester. I'll then hand over for some very brief responses from VinPro.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'll allow the tourism-related questions to Marisa to answer. Yeah, just briefly, the question on national relief funds, a very low uptake because of the loan combination. Only about 10% of the sector used that. Eskom, a big challenge when we think about wine and cooling systems, very disruptive on Eskom. Then the question around transformation. We have different projects in the industry. We've got 62 farming enterprises that's transformed, and we have, I think, 54 black brands, and then a number of combinations where you have farms and wineries. So in terms of the question, in terms of transformation, no, there are a number of projects that is part of the transformation theme. And we have a dedicated unit, a transformation unit, which is funded via the industry to look at support, and we get support from the DTI in terms of marketing as well. So I hope that answers the question. And then Marisa, perhaps you can come in. The funding that we've dotted down is a combination of some of the tourism recovery as well as other interventions. But Marisa, perhaps you can share the tourism component.
Certainly. Thanks, Rico. I'm going to respond to Councillor Bartman's question first relating to TERS payments in our sector and the tourism guides. With regards to TERS, the feedback is mixed. Some of our wineries have been paid and it was pretty smooth sailing for them. Others are still having challenges getting those payments out, so there doesn't seem to be one single experience on that front. And then in terms of the tourism guides, the special fund that the National Department of Tourism established, they've paid out more than 4,000 guides to date. There has been a bit of a delay with some of the guides because when they were in previous employment, not working as guides, they would have contributed UIF. And that payment showed up in the system when they applied for their tourist guides allowance. So they're busy clearing that out. There has been a little bit of delays, but like I said, about 4,000 guides have been paid to date. And then with regards to Councillor Heron's question about funding, yes, we stipulated two sources of funding. The first is tourism supply support funding and a marketing campaign funding. So on I think it's the second to last slide in Rico's presentation, we showed an amount for tourism recovery of 25 million. So that is made up of a campaign funding of 2.5 million, and then allowing a subsidy of 50,000 Rand each for 450 wineries to recompense them for the reopening costs, the PPE, generally a lack of revenue because they're having to space their tables and their tasting bars out so they can accommodate less patrons. So that is how that amount is broken up. And then we also looked at possible job losses in the wine tourism sector, and that amount is included in the TERS subsidy that Rico has indicated at the bottom. I have submitted the ask for both campaign funding and for a subsidy, a reopening subsidy to the National Department of Tourism as well. as part of our sector's input to the tourism recovery plan. So we have flagged it here too, not with the intention to double dip. There are other projects that we applied for funding with the provincial government that I haven't mentioned here, but purely because I think at a national level, there's often a sense that tourism in the province of the Western Cape fares really well, and that we therefore need a little bit less support than the other provinces in the country. So we also wanted to make sure that our needs are flagged with the provincial government in the event that that funding allocation doesn't happen at a national level. I hope that answers both questions.
Thank you. Mr. Basson, do you want to add anything?
Chair, I'm fine for now, unless there are other questions.
Okay, perfect. If I could then hand over for some brief responses from Fidusa.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As indicated in our presentation from the beginning, but in response to the two questions that have been leveled to us, one direct question coming from the ACDP, and then one further comment and alluding to a question from the Honourable Deirdre Bartman in terms of PPE. As I've indicated from the start of the process, our presentation is hinged on the social compact that we have been able to forge on a national level, and we are hoping that the same kind of gesture will be extended on this platform, and that the labour-centric approach is not necessarily diluted by the overwhelming business response on the matter. We also understand the value of human capital in terms of successfully responding to the economic approach, and equally so by driving competitiveness in this province. So we are hoping that our inputs are not necessarily going to be diluted by the number of responses from the business front. But nonetheless, in terms of the question by the Honourable Deirdre Bartman, when we speak about PPEs, PPE has always been a bone of contention, and that is the specific reason that we had indicated that the health infrastructure in this province, albeit the other sector responses towards PPE has always been an issue that we had needed to drive. Henceforth, the reason for us to establish our own funds to augment the assistance to our members that have been in the institutions. I equally wish to draw the committee's attention in terms of its oversight function, specifically so to the Treasury note that had been issued from the National Treasury in particular, focusing on an instruction that had been given in terms of the directive that instructs all national as well as provincial treasuries to focus on the local procurement regulations. It seems that that matter has not necessarily found complete expression in the process here when we are speaking about procurement, local procurement in particular, and the fact that, when there is procurement in excess of 1 million, and I speak to the specific Treasury instruction that has been expanded, that speaks to the tune of the accounting authorities requiring the relevant Treasury as well as the to engage in these processes when there is in excess of 1 million in terms of expenditure. So maybe if you can, engage this document, it would assist in that matter as well, considering the current, media reports that are out there. In terms of the specific question coming from the ACDP, in terms of our comment regarding the effectiveness or the non-effectiveness in terms of provincial government in responding to the community outreach perspectives. In our presentation, we had focused on two areas. We spoke about specifically the transgressions that had been noted, and more so we spoke about the testing criteria, and equally so the area that focused on the psychological impacts. Now, I will allow my colleagues to equally come in on this matters here, but when we talk about the psychological impacts, especially in terms of your frontline personnel, some of the areas that were touched on by the Cape Chamber in terms of the psychological impacts are well noted, but we are not necessarily giving greater expression to, number one, pre-traumatic stress as well as post-traumatic stress. And here we talk about the knock-on effects coming from the world of work, going into the communal response overall, speaking about, not only debriefing, but speaking about counseling in the workplaces, because that is translated to the societal impact, most importantly, where you are finding that as a result of overwhelmedness in the system, as a result of lack of focus, the ripple effect that you are finding there because of lack of accountability in some of the institutions, you are finding that human error is creeping in where, number one, you are finding that incorrect bodies are being cremated. Wrong deaths are being recorded. Forensics being placed with greater burdens in terms of the process moving forward. We're talking about the special measures that are not being adhered to inside the institutions, and more so when it comes to that knock-on effects in the society, where you're talking about the stigma in particular. We are not necessarily doing justice to what we should be doing in those communities that need it most. Communities that rely on awareness campaigns to make sure that we do not go back to that second round of infections that everybody is fearing. So we need to play a greater role. There needs to be greater presence overall to ensure that we are being able to do justice to the mandates that have been given to us. So, Honourable Chair, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues as well to expand further on that societal roles where we have seen the challenges tenfold in the communities in particular, and she will identify specific cases that have been brought to our attention. So if I may indulge you to hand over to Ms. Yumna Abrams and to Ms. Martinique Marinas. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just, we're going to have to keep it brief. So if the total input could be 2 minutes, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Honourable Chairperson and members. Okay, what Rivda has touched on is things that we've seen to light. Part of it in the communities, because we are DA province, the government isn't actually playing a role in the communities. Like the previous speakers spoke about, the Mitchell's Plain commercial. One of the things that was brought up, what is the communities? What do you mean about the communities? How is government be more visible in communities? That is supposed to answer the question what they have brought up to the front of saying, first and foremost, people are doing what they want. There is nothing in place. People's not understanding and speaking in the terms of literal terms. You need to come down to their level to explain. This is happening on the Cape Flats. We come from the Cape Flats. We are labor. And it's affecting all industries. This is where it comes to, you've got the different things happening. Part of everything else is also where the UIF comes in, where UIF hasn't been paid out. There is more unemployment rate. So your crime rate has increased. We have seen this. There was an incident that happened in Mitchell's Plain, hijacking as well, shooting. All of these things is all factors to what's happening. And this is where the government needs to come in and do their part in the communities. And it's not happening. You're not seeing them visible. Yes, they're not even helping the NGOs giving food out or helping where the finance is concerned, because we all know what happened to that money that was put aside for the COVID part. This is where it comes to. People have to dig in their own to help. And this is where the communities comes together. What is government doing? The ward councils are taking all the glory and fame, but it's not, because people isn't even taking into consideration social distancing while standing in line for food parcels or getting their food for the day. So these are things that what I feel and what we feel strongly that as from Labour side that government needs to show the input in this and how to educate the people, the masses, completely correctly, not using the high terminology that we use when we're speaking because we understand it, but the layman person do not understand. We need to come down to the level. I think
that's 2 minutes. So if you could wrap up, please.
Part of everything else also, we one of the honorable from the DA spoke about the UIFs with personal care. There is nothing happening. People are still waiting for money. Coming from bargaining council in also as so far in the personal care sector hasn't even got a cent from the TERS money, still waiting with the whole thing hanging on hold. It's not fair. And one of the things that government needs to look at is also helping bargaining councils before they close down. And because you must remember, bargaining councils just as strong as the industry. And with this hard lockdown, a lot of salons have been open. There was no Section 189 happening, no severance being paid out. So this is the reality we're facing. And this is where government needs to step up and say, you know what, this is what we can do for you guys. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Agri Western Cape for some responses, please.
Thank you, Chair and Honourable Christians. Thank you for the question. I think it's very valid questions. Just on the seasonal farm workers, I've mentioned the protocols that we designed with the Department of Agriculture, and that was also communicated and accepted by the Eastern Cape Province, their Premier and HOD. So yeah, it's very important for us for the farmer and the farm workers to adhere to that protocol. Unfortunately, we heard about incidents where some of the screening wasn't done properly, but we still keeping or continuously advising our members regarding it, and especially in the Witzenberg area where they were the first hotspot. Our structures really sorted out those issues, and hopefully we won't have that in the future. On the rural safety question, I must say after the Stellenbosch farm murder, our minister, our provincial minister Fritz and Meyer established a rural technical safety committee, and we are part of that committee, and we have frequently meetings and discussing all the rural safety issues, because for us, as you've mentioned, it is a great concern in terms of the rural safety, and if we talk about rural safety, we talk about safety of all everybody in the rural area. So that's a great concern, and I must also say the Department of Agriculture is currently engaging with a rural safety baseline survey to determine exactly the last 2 years what happened in the rural areas, and to use that information to develop a strategy as well. Just the last comment, Madam Chair, in terms of rural safety and crime on infrastructure, it's also a great concern for us. Eskom cables, Telkom cables, and infrastructure like pumps, water pumps, and so forth, and irrigation then that's been hampered, it's a great concern for us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much to all the organizations for those responses. I'm going to take a final, very short round of questions, and instead we will park the consideration of our minutes to the next meeting to save time, because our meeting time has in fact expired. So could I just check if there are any final questions? Are there any final questions from the DA, please?
Sorry, Chair, I'm trying to
I can
unmute.
hear you.
Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you very much. Honourable Chair, through you to Mr. Basson of Winpro, to what extent does the COVID Command Centre and advising body liaise with the liquor industry when they introduced these bans and when they drafted the regulations that limit the sale and distribution of liquor? And then secondly, and linked to that, we cannot deny, and we've been quite shocked to learn from our own health department officials, the huge pressure that alcohol abuse is putting on the health system. My question is then, and I know you can't speak on behalf of the whole of the liquor industry, but would you accept co-responsibility for this and the harms that are being done through alcohol abuse? And would you be willing to play an even bigger role in assisting the public sector in curbing the problems caused by alcohol abuse? And then the last question to Mr. Basson, is there anything else apart from lobbying the central government that you believe we as a Western Cape Provincial Parliament can do to assist the wine industry? And then to Mr. Yanni Strydom, can I just ask, in terms of the health protocols, whose responsibility is it to check the temperature and to ensure that passengers complete their health questionnaires when they embark taxis? And secondly, when they arrive on a farm, who seem to have been at fault at the well-documented case where pruning teams recently arrived from the Koa Bokkerveld from the Eastern Cape without the protocols apparently being adhered to? And just perhaps on a slightly different note, do you believe that the high demand for our citrus is caused by COVID-19, or is this part of a bigger upward demand for citrus and therefore a sustainable market? Do I have time left, Chair?
Yes, but I also see that Honourable America would like to pose questions, but please proceed. There's one and a half left.
Then let me leave that for Honourable America. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable America.
Thank you, Chair. Question to introducer, whether there are involved any large-scale retrenchments in the Western Cape at the CCMA, and if so, what the experience is in the processing of such a dispute. Secondly, for the Mitchells Plain Business Chamber, does it have a relationship with the sub-councils, and given the challenges they have with the planning officers, and could they not lobby the sub-council to have a presence created in the area? And secondly, also for the Mitchells Plain Chamber, is that what economic impact did the cancellation of the Mitchells Plain Festival have on their members? For Vinpro, how did the ban on the sale of alcohol impact on the South African producers' global competitiveness and market share? And will the current position be displaced with the new wine producers like Chile and Australia? And secondly, the suspension of the expansion of Consul, will it have a significant impact on the industry? And lastly, previously disadvantaged players in the sector, how were they affected? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable America. I'll now hand over to the ANC. Are there any final questions for the ANC, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I would just like to ask, I'm not sure if the representatives from the wine industry are present still, but in one of the slides, they specifically talked about the kind of interventions that would be required. So I would just like to ask, in regard to their current engagements, they had a table there and they listed particular amounts that they require to ensure a sustainable recovery of the sector. So I would like to ask what progress has been achieved. Are they engaging with National DTI on this? Have they received any feedback from the Provincial Department of Economic Opportunities? And if they could just elaborate on where they are in trying to secure what they indicate they need to put the industry back on track. And then I'd also like to ask that whether in terms of the construction industry, I'm not sure whether the Master Builders Association would be able to help with those figures now, but is there any information about which members of the construction industry since lockdown have had to be liquidated, and what are the number of workers that have been affected by those liquidations since the beginning of lockdown? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, if there are no further questions, I'm then going to recognise the ACDP.
Chairperson, I'm covered.
Thank you very much. Then that concludes the final round of questions. I'm going to recognise the organisations in the order which the questions were asked. So I'll start with Vinpro.
Thank you, Chair. I made furious notes, so I hope I cover it all. Yeah, firstly, I think the engagements with the Command Centre was frustrating, to say the least, purely because we could never engage directly with them or had any prior consultation in terms of decision making. What we have done is engage with our functional departments, which would be Minister Dediza, Agriculture, and Minister Patel at the DTI. In terms of where we are, as I say, we have at NETLAC crafted the social compact, and if I get the question right, those interventions that I mentioned in my slideshow is what was agreed to between labour, industry, government, and civil society in terms of what we call targeted interventions. And then we've also set up a joint forum between the industry and Department of Health and DTI, because we do think that research should be shared and that we, by doing that, can manage hotspots far better. And if that means cutting off supply or that means closing outlets that doesn't comply, that is most certainly there. The Western Cape Parliament, the Western Cape Province has been very supportive, I need to say, from the Premier all the way through. And I would like to see that continue. But I do think there are a number of advocacy and support, which is not always needs monetary assistance. It's more policy changes on things like trade and reputation of the harbour. So I'll gladly offline engage with more questions around that. I think the ban most certainly impacted competitiveness. If you think that it takes a shipping container 28 days to get to Europe, we were out of the market for 5 weeks. And whilst our market was very patient and very empathetically, without a doubt, we lost shelf space. Because all our competitors, Chile, New Zealand, was open for trade, and ultimately there are losses. I can't quantify that, but I think it's fair to say that we could ill afford any losses. So we do need assistance on that. The console challenge is a huge challenge because they supply bottles. And in terms of that, there are challenges on certain specs, but I do think it's since been rectified. And then our empowerment projects, 80% of the wine sector are very small. About 400 of the 500 wineries are SMMEs, and a lot of them include the previously disadvantaged component. And that's why we want specific assistance for them, obviously the biggest sector as well. But it will be a pity if we lose a lot of hard work that's gone into transformation and worker-related projects. And I'm really concerned about that. I think the last questions was around the amounts. We have formalized what we call a disaster recovery plan. And within that, there are different levers. The first one was to convince National Treasury to give an extension on excise payments, which they have granted for 90 days. At the moment, we have submitted a funding application at Western Cape Department Agriculture. Marisa spoke about National Tourism. And we are about to engage with other departments, including Minister Dediza in a week's time. So there are a whole array of departments and different elements to look at. So, Chair, I hope I've covered most of the points. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those responses. I'll then hand over to Agri Western Cape, please.
Madam Chair, yeah, thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. On your question on the enforcement of the health protocol, For sure, it starts with the employer, his responsibility or his or her responsibility to check that. But then also and from our slide, we also recommended that a COVID-19 health and safety manager be appointed on each farm, or as far as possible, or incorporated with the health and safety officer on the farm, and they should sign off the screening forms. The specific matter you referred to, or case you referred to, the team leader on the Eastern Cape side should have screened and should have signed the form. I believe, according to my information, the forms were completed but not signed. And then when the people arrive on the farm, then the officer on the farm should screen. That's a protocol that we wrote. Every employee should be screened, and the safety officer should sign it off. And then on the enforcement side, also via the roadblocks, the traffic, we should also check the required documents that we written in the protocol, the IDs, the contracts, and so forth. And then also the Department of Employment and Labour, they do continuously audits on farms, and they pick up where there's the issues, and we have no problem where there's a lack of adherence that the necessary steps been taken. So, but from our side, we really promote it and convey the message to our members to please adhere to these protocols, because it took a time to pin them down and to get them accepted, especially in the Eastern Cape as well. On the citrus, I'm quite tentative in embarking on an industry or commodity industry ground, but what I would definitely assume is that the vitamin C part, especially in this time, contributes to it, and then also our quality. That's really of a high standard at this stage. I think it's quite well. It's the two contributors to the demand of our citrus, the South African citrus. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Agri Western Cape. I then move on to response to the question to Fedusa.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. In response to the large-scale retrenchments or retrenchments overall that we are looking at, yes, indeed, we've outlined in our submission the sectors that have been hard hit by the process, but more specifically, the advancement of these 189s as a result of the hard lockdown. We start with the heavy-handedness from the top down, and we take a look at state-owned company based in the Western Cape Telkom. We've had approximately 3,000 members affected by just one swipe of the whip at this stage. We have already escalated that. We are in engagements currently with the CCMA, but at times it feels as if the matter is being dragged and the burden of proof ends up elsewhere. These are matters that are simply challenging outright because the vision and the corporate strategy that underpins the process is completely deviant from essentially what the service providers should be doing. We are taking a look at a fiber generation that is focused on taking us into the fourth and the fifth industrial revolutions, and these are obviously some of the challenges that we are facing with. We equally take a look at the tourism and hospitality sectors. It's quite interesting that we have many of our agri sectors on board in terms of this matter, and as we await the stats that will be released somewhere in September by the Statistician General, and equally so now that level 2 lockdowns provisions are in place, we acknowledge the fact that hardships have been experienced in the sector, but as we once again say, we are looking at that social compact in order to take hands and move forward here, because ultimately the knock-on effects that are experienced by the farmers and by the sector is going to be translated into those 189s, and the true figure there is yet to be revealed. Once again, you take a look at the small, medium and micro enterprises, the heartbeat of this economy, and here we take a look at those not only in the formal but in the informal economy at the same time, and the personal care sector is one of those. hairdressers, cosmetologists, beauticians. The collective might of that sector cannot be underpinned. And as a result of them being subjected to the lockdown levels, they've experienced massive challenges. You've heard Yumna speaking about the bargaining councils, and equally so, those formal employers inside your malls and those areas, but equally so, the informal employers and the challenges that they are having. So we are attempting to quantify that figures, but we are consistently hearing about retrenchments that are ongoing. So we won't be able to provide you with an accurate figure in that regard, but it's one of the sectors, once again. Printing and packaging has consistently taken a knock, and they are daily at the CCMA. As a result of the mechanization and the industrialization of that sector, moving on to new dimensions now, that sector continues to bleed, and we have to take a look at alternates in terms of moving forward. The retail industry, equally bad in terms of the number of 189s that have been submitted, and the EdCon case, which is quite big, linked to manufacturing, is going to bring in a lot more hardships for this province. So we really have to put the necessary measures in place to ensure that we can become more localized, more focused on the local procurement measures, and that is where the Western Cape government will play a more proactive role in trying to minimize the impact, but equally so creating that economic environment that will spurn on greater possibilities for us to move forward. But the statistics I can most certainly provide to you in terms of the actual figure that we are receiving. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for the response. I then move to the Mitchells Plain Chamber.
Thank you, Honourable America, for those two questions. They particularly touch the heart of what is our local economy. Let me take the last one first. The Mitchells Plain Festival's cancellation is really a major blow to us locally. It's the one opportunity when so many local businesses get a chance to be able to talk to over 40,000 guests over a weekend who come irrespective of race or because of their beliefs. We've got so many people, CEOs of large businesses, banks. We've got so many people who come in and pledge support for Mitchells Plain once a year. It's one of the major attractions of the province and has been running for more than 10 years. The cost that we actually see money coming through the gates is minuscule in comparison to the other kind of spin-off costs, the kinds of sales which happens at the tables. Those aren't counted in the number of people who sign up for events, the revenue that gets generated annually. It's something which people look forward to because it lifts their business up for at least the next 4 to 5 months after that. So that is a fairly major event. So sorry about that. You know, one of the things we get used to is having people walking in the camera halfway to the conversation. So we have to take a look at the fact that the cost to Mitchells Plain's local economy is fairly big this year, even though we are level 2 right now and possibly improving on that. The other thing as well is that we see a distinct drop in crime every year at the time of that event, and so we see this calming effect. We see this thing of bringing business. We see this thing of celebration, and that coming at the end of the pandemic, having removed that, it's very difficult to be able to put down a cost as to what it is that not being able to do that is going to have on us, and that's excluding the cost to the actual organizers of this, who do a sterling job every year in promoting us as a little city within a city. So it's difficult for me to say what the total impact is going to be. I doubt that anybody can really put a number down. It's just that you've got to talk about the impact in the heart, not the wallet. With regards to sub-council relationships, it's always been good. In fact, the Plain Chamber started off under the guidance and under the support of Sub-Council 23's chairperson, Councillor Alton Jansen, has been an amazing support every year so far. When you need a venue, they open up the council chambers to us. We had developed a very strong relationship with the previous, the late chairperson of Subcouncil 12 as well, and unfortunately, his loss has been our loss as well. Working on developing those relationships again is something which is important. But I think what is really important is sub-council chairs, councillors, the city of Cape Town, while they can pledge a lot of good support, at the end of the day, the political machinery doesn't always help the business machinery. It's the small businesses that get up and have to go at 4 o'clock in the morning to go and sit at the train station to sell sweets. It is the ones who knit at home and go out and sell their wares. It's the ones who paint, the ones who do the work. And often enough, the work that we're supposed to be getting, the Public Finance Act restricts government from passing work on to our own people, because number one, even though we promised that we're supposed to get them paid within 7 days or so, we have situations like in Drakensberg municipality where they make sure they still pay consistently 30 days later. The government departments and government isn't geared up to actually roll up their sleeves and get down and dirty with us, the small businesses. It would be nice to see that changing, but it would mean that we'd expect government to do exactly what we expect of checkers, Pick and Pay. And that is, look at your budgets and ask yourselves, are you spending 30% on us? Because I know you aren't. I know that it goes out on tender, and I know that we don't benefit always from all of that business. So sub-council chairs are fantastic to have a good relationship with, help to identify land where we can. But when it gets down to asking, do we help the small business? The question is quite simple. In your procurement budget for 2021, have you allocated a percentage to us? Thanks.
Thank you very much to the Mitchells Plain Chamber of Commerce. And then the final responses from the questions is to the Master Builders Association.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be as brief as possible. Rightly so, we don't have any statistics on businesses going into liquidation. We haven't heard of anybody specifically going into liquidation because of lockdown. As we rightly know, and it's public knowledge, there are a number of businesses that were in trouble before lockdown for a variety of reasons, a number of those being non-payment from various government sources. But as I alluded to earlier on, we haven't seen the long-term effect yet. So I can only imagine that in the next coming months, we might see something happening. We might see businesses that just haven't been able to carry through. A lot of businesses had work to go back to, so they would obviously have to complete that work. But we'll have to wait and see what happens there. Just on top of that as well, we have heard of a number of retrenchments taking place, but I'm not 100% sure whether these retrenchments are based purely on COVID. I know a number of the bigger companies are shedding labour due to the fact that everything basically done on sites now is done by subcontractors. And there are one or two companies who had to downsize also due to financial issues. So there is a fair amount of retrenchment taking place. But yes, I believe we're going to have to wait for the next few months to see, possibly into next year, to see what the knock-on effect has been on whether companies are going to survive going forward, or whether they're simply just going to shut their doors after they've completed the works that they've tendered for, that they're doing. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. That then concludes the meeting today. We had 3 sets of minutes to consider and adopt, but I think those will stand over to our next meeting. So I wanted to say a very big thank you to all the organizations that have spent time with us this afternoon. Thank you very much for having prepared those presentations and inputs. Thank you very much for having answered our questions. And importantly, thank you very much for the work that you do in representing your members in these very, very difficult and unprecedented times. As a committee, we're very grateful to you for sharing insights with us, which will help us in our report and to make recommendations to government so that overall we can do the best that we can to help overcome this dual crisis of the health pandemic as well as the job loss pandemic. So thank you very much again on behalf of all committee members. Thank you for coming here today. I'd then like to thank the members for their constructive inputs, as well as to thank the procedural officers for all the work that they've done for preparing for this meeting and ensuring that it ran very smoothly. So I'd like to then wish you all well, to keep safe and to keep healthy, and the meeting is then adjourned. Thank you.